Welcome to the world of darkness where nightmares inhabit your dreams. I've noticed YouTube's algorithm hides my stories. Your interaction is the only way to reach new listeners. If these stories frighten you, please like, subscribe, and activate notifications. Any comment, however brief, helps spread my stories to other horror fans. Now relax, close your eyes, and let the rain wash away your thoughts as I guide you through tonight's terrifying tale. I'm Ranger Kate, and my job is simple. Protect the park, its wildlife, and its visitors. The job had always felt like a slow, rhythmic beat, a kind of controlled chaos where nature dictated the pace. That was until something happened last night. Something that would forever change the way I looked at the woods I'd come to love. I'd been at my station, deep within the heart of Pinewood National Park, when the call came through. A family had gone missing. A father, mother, and 2 young children, last seen camping near Pine Hill. The park had its share of disappearances, but something about this case unsettled me. The family had set up camp, and it was a busy time of year. The idea that no one had seen or heard from them for 24 hours was a red flag. My instincts told me there was something more to this than just a simple case of lost hikers. There were rumors in the park. Whispers about strange occurrences, even about the land itself. I geared up quickly, grabbing my radio, flashlight, and the necessary supplies. The evening sun was fading, but the forest was alive with sounds. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. I made my way to the site where the family had last been seen. A small clearing near the base of Pine Hill. As I approached, the sense of stillness hit me. There was no movement, no sign of life. The forest felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. The clearing was empty except for the remnants of the campfire. The logs still had fresh burn marks, their charred, blackened edges radiating a strange heat. But there was something odd about it. The fire was gone, reduced to nothing more than a pit of ash. The area around it was disturbingly untouched. No camping gear, no discarded wrappers, no evidence of anyone leaving in a hurry. The woods should have smelled like firewood and cooking food, but instead the air was stale, as though time had stopped. I knelt by the fire pit, my flashlight casting long shadows across the ground. Something in the pit caught my eye. A shiny, metallic object buried among the ashes. My heart pounded as I reached down and picked it up. It was a small silver ring. It looked out of place, like it had been dropped on purpose. My mind raced. The family had been wearing rings, I remembered. Was this theirs? Suddenly, a faint sound drifted through the trees. A soft, almost imperceptible laugh. It didn't belong here. It wasn't the laughter of children playing or the light-hearted chuckles of a family sharing a joke. It was distant, eerie, and it echoed in a way that seemed wrong. My skin crawled as I stood up, scanning the clearing. No one was there. I shook my head, trying to brush off the unease creeping up my spine. But then, as I moved closer to the fire pit, the voices grew clearer. I could hear snippets of conversation. Low, indistinct murmurs, like people talking just out of sight. Every time I stepped toward the pit, the voices grew louder, more distinct. And then it hit me. This wasn't just any campfire. It was as though the fire had somehow captured their voices, trapped them in some otherworldly way. A chill ran down my back, and I took a hesitant step back. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The voices were unmistakable now, low and familiar, like echoes from a distant past. The murmur of a woman's voice, followed by the unmistakable sound of a child's giggle. But it wasn't right. These weren't the voices of anyone who should have been in the park that day. The laughter, the conversation, it was all too familiar, yet unnervingly foreign. I couldn't tell if I was hearing the memories of campers who had been lost or something else entirely. The sound was so vivid, so tangible, I could almost reach out and touch it. I stepped back from the fire, my heart hammering in my chest. The smell of the charred logs clung to the air, mixing with something sour and metallic like blood. I wiped my forehead, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that was settling in my gut. I'd been trained to handle the unexpected. Wildlife encounters, dangerous weather conditions, even lost hikers. But this was beyond anything I had ever been prepared for. The voices grew clearer still, now distinctly human. A man's voice, deep but strained, seemed to be calling out to someone. "Where are you? Please, where are you?" He sounded desperate, terrified. I felt the hairs on my neck rise as I realized the implications. This wasn't just a memory trapped in the fire. This was something that had happened, something that had been left behind. I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus. The logical part of my brain told me this had to be a trick of the mind, a hallucination brought on by the stress of the search and the isolation of the park. But as I stared into the fire pit, the shadows dancing like twisted phantoms, I knew there was something more going on here. I could almost see the figures of the people, the family, hovering just at the edge of my vision, their outlines shifting in the flickering light. The voices were now louder than ever, their words clear and unmistakable. "Please don't leave us," a woman begged, her voice cracking with fear. We're here. The words sent a chill down my spine. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized that whatever was happening, it was tied to this place, to this fire. I needed to find answers. And fast. But how? My mind raced as I thought through the possibilities. Had the family left some kind of spiritual imprint on the site? Or had something darker taken hold of the land? Whatever the case, I couldn't shake the feeling that the fire was key to understanding what had happened here. And what was still happening. I turned my back to the fire, scanning the dark woods around me. The sounds of the forest seemed muffled, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. I could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes on me, watching and waiting. But there was no time to lose. The family was out there, somewhere, and if these voices were anything to go by, they weren't the first to vanish in these woods. Something was drawing them in, and I had to find out what. The fire pit seemed to pull me back in. The voices were louder now, too clear to ignore. They weren't just echoes. They were real, they were alive in some other way. I found myself stepping closer, compelled by something I couldn't explain. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees above, but the clearing was unnervingly still. It felt like the forest itself was waiting for me to make my move. I knelt down once more, the ground cold beneath my knees as I studied the fire pit, hoping, no, praying, that I'd find something that made sense. Anything that would explain the surreal events unfolding around me. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the site. I tried to steady my breathing, but the tension in my chest only tightened. "Don't leave us," the voice of the woman cried again. This time it was sharper, filled with an urgent desperation. It made my stomach churn. I couldn't understand it, but I knew this wasn't just a family that had gotten lost. They hadn't wandered off into the woods. They were trapped. But how? Why? I stood, suddenly disoriented. A chill passed over me, like a cold wind had just swept through the clearing, but there was no breeze. Just the suffocating stillness of the woods around me. The laughter continued, growing distorted. It sounded like it was coming from all around me, echoing in every direction. As if the very air had absorbed their voices, their memories, and now it was playing them back on loop. I grabbed my radio, wanting to call in for backup, but when I looked down at it, it was silent. No static, no response. The screen was dark, unresponsive. My stomach sank as I realized that something here had interfered with the communications. I checked the time. Nearly 2 hours had passed since I'd first arrived at the site. It felt like minutes. Time had become warped in this place. I glanced around again, feeling the oppressive weight of the woods. It wasn't just the voices that unnerved me now. It was the sense of being watched. The sensation that I wasn't alone, even though I couldn't see anyone. I turned, half expecting someone to step out from the trees, but there was nothing. No movement. No sign of life. I needed to get out. I needed to find help. But a voice inside me, one I couldn't quiet, told me I had to stay. That this fire, this place held the key. If I left, I might never understand what had happened here, or to the families that had disappeared before. The park had a long history of strange occurrences, but I'd never believed the rumors. Not until now. Now I was caught in something bigger than me. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone, hoping for some signal. The screen remained dark, the bar indicator showing no service. No, I whispered under my breath. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a technical glitch. Whatever force held this place in its grip wasn't letting me leave. I stepped back from the fire pit, my heart racing. There was a growing sense of urgency gnawing at me. The voices, those tortured, desperate voices, had stopped, but their presence lingered in the air like smoke. I could still hear the faintest echoes of the woman's plea, "Don't leave us." It was an order now, not a request. It felt like something beyond the human realm was calling to me, urging me to stay, to investigate further. I couldn't shake the feeling that this fire, this site, was more than just a place where a family had camped. It felt ancient, cursed even. And it wasn't just the eerie voices that unnerved me. It was the overwhelming sensation that something was waiting. Something had been waiting for me to arrive. The ring I had found earlier, still clenched tightly in my hand, felt heavier now, like it was pulsing with a dark energy of its own. I stared at it for a moment, trying to connect the dots. The family who had vanished, they'd been wearing rings. Their belongings had disappeared without a trace. But this ring, it was different. The wind picked up again, this time swirling around me in dizzying gusts. The trees groaned, their branches creaking under the pressure. I lifted my eyes to the treetops, squinting through the darkness, and for the briefest of moments, I thought I saw movement. Shadowy figures, too fast to register fully. I couldn't be sure. The night was swallowing everything in its wake. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was stronger now than ever. I stuffed the ring into my pocket, desperate to get a grip on my surroundings. There was a strange heaviness in the air. The woods felt wrong, unnaturally quiet even for nighttime. I grabbed my flashlight again, scanning the perimeter of the clearing. I couldn't ignore the nagging sensation at the back of my mind. Someone, was out there. But what was I supposed to do? I was alone. The radio wasn't working. My phone was useless. I was trapped in the very place I had been sent to investigate. A loud rustling broke through the silence, and I spun around, flashlight trained on the movement. My breath hitched in my throat when I saw what had caused it. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stood just beyond the edge of the clearing. It was too tall to be human, and it didn't move like anything I'd ever seen before. The figure's outline flickered, shifting in and out of focus like it was caught between two worlds. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I took a step back, my hand shaking, but I couldn't bring myself to turn and run. Something in me, something primal, told me not to make myself a target. But the longer I stood there, the more the figure seemed to take shape. It wasn't just the outline of a man or a shadow. It had substance. I could see the glint of something sharp, something metallic, catching the dim light of my flashlight. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. Suddenly, the voice of the woman came again. Louder this time, almost as if she were right beside me. "Help us, please help us." The voice was frantic, but there was something else in it now. Anger, desperation. The sound sent a shiver down my spine, and my breath came in short gasps. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its presence growing stronger, like it was feeding off the energy in the air. I didn't know what to do. The fire, the voices, the figure, it was all too much. But there was one thing I knew for certain now. Whatever was happening, whatever had trapped those families, it wasn't just some strange coincidence. It was something far more dangerous, something that had been lurking in the depths of these woods for far too long. And if I didn't figure it out soon, I might be next. The figure didn't move. It was as though it were a part of the forest itself, its presence interwoven with the shadows, as ancient as the trees around us. The air felt thick, pressing down on me, and every instinct I had screamed for me to run. But I couldn't. Something in my gut told me that fleeing would only make things worse. The darkness was alive, and it had been waiting for me. The woman's voice broke through the air again, now a distorted wail. "Don't leave, please." It was so loud that it felt like it was inside my head. The sound of the voice shifted in pitch, warping as though it were coming from the fire itself. My heart pounded in my chest, and my eyes darted back to the campfire. The light from my flashlight flickered, casting ghostly shapes across the clearing. The woods, the air, the fire. They all seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't understand. The figure, though still silent, seemed to grow larger in my vision. It was taller now, a grotesque silhouette that loomed over the trees, blocking out the faint light from the moon. My legs trembled, but I forced myself to take a step forward. I didn't know what I was hoping for, but something told me I had to face whatever this was, that if I didn't, I might lose my chance to uncover the truth. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. The fire. It had to be the key. I had to find a way to stop whatever was happening to these people. I couldn't just leave them trapped in this nightmare. The ring in my pocket burned against my skin, a constant reminder that I was holding the answer. The fire had claimed these spirits, but the ring was tied to them in some way. It had to be. I knelt down once again, staring into the glowing embers of the fire. The shadows danced in strange patterns, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw faces. Familiar faces, emerging from the smoke. The father, the mother, the children. Their eyes were wide with fear, their mouths open in silent screams. They weren't just memories, they were trapped here. Their souls imprisoned by the fire. This fire wasn't natural. It was something older, something far darker, and I had walked right into its grasp. The wind howled through the trees, and I heard the rustling again, louder this time. The figure was moving toward me, its form shifting in and out of focus like it was both part of the forest and something beyond it. I could hear its footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy, but the voice of the woman cut through the sound of the rustling. "They're coming. They're all coming. You need to stop them. Stop the fire." I felt my breath catch in my throat. The fire. The entity that had been trapped in the flames for so long. It was hungry. It had been feeding off the souls of the lost, drawing them in, keeping them here. But now it wanted more. It wanted me. I stood up quickly, feeling the weight of the moment settle on me like a boulder. This was no longer just a missing family case. This was something far more sinister, something tied to the very land itself. The fire had become a vessel, a portal between worlds, and I was standing on the threshold. The figure was getting closer, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Every part of me screamed to run, to escape. But in my gut, I knew that wasn't the answer. The only way to stop it, to free the trapped souls, was to confront it head-on. The fire, the ring, the voices, they were all connected, and I had to destroy it, or it would destroy me. I couldn't breathe. The figure loomed closer, its presence suffocating. I felt the weight of the ring in my pocket, its heat almost unbearable, pulsing with a sinister energy. The woman's voice was now a frantic scream, the words blending together in a chaotic swirl of desperation. "Stop the fire, don't let them take you." It was a warning, one that I couldn't ignore, even if I wanted to. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I pulled the ring from my pocket, staring at it like it might hold the answers I desperately needed. It felt heavier than it had before, as if the fire itself was feeding off its energy. I gripped it tightly, hoping it might do something. Anything. To stop this nightmare. The figure was almost on top of me now. I could hear its breath, ragged and uneven, as if it were alive, but also not. It was the sound of something ancient, something that had been trapped for centuries, waiting for the right moment to break free. And that moment, I realized with a sickening jolt, was now. It was me it wanted, me it had been waiting for. I stared into the fire, the flames now twisting into grotesque shapes. The shadows in the smoke shifted again, forming the faces of the missing campers, their eyes wide and pleading. I could almost hear their whispers, faint and distant, urging me to do something, anything, to stop the madness. "Please help us. They begged, their voices tangled with the sound of the wind and the crackling of the fire. I had no choice. The fire was feeding on them, on their souls, and if I didn't act now, it would feed on me too. I looked down at the ring once more, and with a force I didn't know I had, I hurled it into the flames. Time seemed to slow as the ring fell, spinning in the air, its surface glowing as it neared the fire. The moment it made contact with the flames, a blinding flash of light erupted from the pit, sending me stumbling backward. The earth beneath me shook, and the wind screamed like a living thing, tearing through the trees and ripping at my clothes. I shielded my eyes, the light blinding, but I could still hear the fire. The crackling of the flames, the echoing screams of the trapped souls, and something else. Something peaceful. The chaos of the voices began to subside, their frantic pleas replaced with a strange calm. The air around me cleared, and for the first time since I had arrived, the woods felt still. When I dared to open my eyes, the fire was nothing more than a pile of smoldering embers, the flames reduced to nothing but smoke and ash. The figure was gone, as though it had never been there at all. I looked around the clearing, half expecting the shadows to return, but there was nothing. The woods were silent once more. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the crushing pressure that had been building since I first arrived slowly fading. The air was no longer heavy with darkness. It was just the forest again. I've been a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for over 15 years. In that time, I've seen a lot. Wild animals, harsh weather, lost hikers, you name it. But if you told me a year ago that the old folklore around here was more than just campfire stories, I would have laughed in your face. But I'm not laughing now. It all started last summer. The heat was oppressive, and the forests felt unusually still, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. I was stationed near a remote section of the park, an area known for its rugged terrain and few visitors. The locals call it Dead Man's Hollow, and while the name has always given me the creeps, I never put much stock in the legends that surrounded the place. The folklore in these parts runs deep. Stories of spirits, strange creatures, and ancient curses are passed down from generation to generation. My grandmother used to tell me about the wampus cat, a half-woman, half-cat creature that stalks the forests at night. There's also the melon heads, said to be deformed, inbred humanoids that live in hidden caves and come out to hunt in the dark. And then there's the wood devils, tall, thin beings that blend into the trees, whispering your name as they watch you. I thought it was all nonsense. That was until I encountered something I can't explain. It was a late afternoon when I first noticed the change. I was out doing my rounds, checking some remote trails for any signs of washouts from a recent storm. As I hiked deeper into the hollow, I noticed that the usual sounds of the forest had gone silent. No birds, no insects, even the wind had stopped. It was as if the entire mountain had gone mute. The air felt thick, oppressive, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was an instinct, like something primal inside me was trying to tell me to leave. But I pushed on, telling myself it was just the heat messing with my senses. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something tall and pale, slipping between the trees. I stopped in my tracks, scanning the forest, but there was nothing. Just the stillness. I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe even a coyote, but something didn't feel right. Whatever I had seen moved on two legs, and it was too tall, too lanky to be any animal native to these woods. I kept walking, but now every step felt heavier. My instincts were screaming at me to turn around, but I didn't want to be the guy who ran from his own imagination. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper, like someone calling my name from far away. I froze, straining to listen, but the voice was gone. I was about to turn back when I heard it again. This time it was closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the trees, and that's when I saw it, clear as day. Standing about 30 yards away, just on the edge of the tree line, was a figure. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, but thin. unnaturally thin, with limbs that looked too long for its body. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it had no facial features that I could make out. Just a blank, smooth surface where a face should have been. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Or at least, I think it was staring at me. Then, slowly, it lifted one of its long, bony arms and pointed directly at me. That was enough. My mind was racing, every logical part of me trying to explain it away, but deep down, I knew what I was seeing wasn't human, and it wasn't anything I was prepared to face. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was back at the ranger station, my lungs burning and my legs trembling. I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me, and only then did I dare to glance out the window. There was nothing there. Just the darkening forest, calm and quiet, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen. I wasn't imagining it. I spent the rest of that night in the station, too afraid to leave. I tried to convince myself that it was some kind of trick of the light, maybe a shadow or an optical illusion. But deep down, I knew better. The stories, the legends, they weren't just stories. They were warnings. In the days that followed, I tried to forget about it. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that maybe the stress of the job and the isolation had gotten to me. But then more reports started coming in. Hikers had been going missing near Dead Man's Hollow. Experienced outdoorsmen, people who knew the area like the back of their hand, simply vanished without a trace. Search parties found nothing. No signs of struggle, no tracks, no bodies. It was like they'd been swallowed up by the forest. And then there were the sightings. Other rangers, local hunters, and even a few campers reported seeing something out there. Something tall and pale, moving through the trees, watching from a distance. I wanted to quit. I almost did. But something inside me, maybe it was pride or maybe it was fear, kept me here, kept me searching for answers. I spent weeks researching the folklore of the region, talking to the locals and digging through old records. The more I learned, the more I realized how much we didn't understand about these mountains. The stories of the wood devils, the wampus cat, the melonheads. They weren't just tall tales. They were descriptions of things people had seen, things they'd encountered deep in the wilderness, and things they couldn't explain. I haven't seen the creature again, but I feel its presence every time I set foot in those woods. There's a weight to the air, a stillness that settles over the land like a shroud. It's a reminder that this place, as beautiful and serene as it may seem, is not ours. There are things out here that have lived in these mountains long before us, and they don't take kindly to being disturbed. So if you ever find yourself hiking in the Appalachian Mountains, and the forest goes quiet, listen to your gut. Turn around. Leave. Because the folklore is real, and some things are better left undisturbed. In 2000, a family purchased 30 acres of land in rural Elbert County and took up residence. Since then, they and neighbors have had many sightings of a Bigfoot creature. They have found anomalous footprints, smelled the creature, and heard grunts, screams, and whoops, the later a low to high bass sound lasting several seconds, wrote Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization BFRO investigator Mick also reported were feelings of being watched, feelings that the family should leave a particular area, and at least one stalking incident involving the witness being separated from her mother, father, and the family dog becoming very frightened. The dog has acted intimidated both inside and outside the house. In one instance, a teenager and an adult riding a four-wheeler on the property sighted the creature. Encounters often occur when only women are present, a peculiarity noted in other cases. Sightings have happened in all seasons and at every time of day for a decade. The property contains a pine forest, a river bottom, a pond, and a large swamp. Access to much of it is barred by thick undergrowth and swamp. The area abounds in fish and game. Deer, hogs, and smaller mammals are plentiful. In other words, it is the perfect Bigfoot country. Mick and 3 other investigators interviewed the family and explored the property in August 2009. They concluded that the family probably has a Bigfoot either moving through the area regularly or may have one or two living in the immediate area. The lady who wrote Bifro, a registered nurse, emphasized, "I do not want this animal to be harmed in any way possible or removed from its habitat. It is not a threat to anyone or anything." She feared that it would be hunted down just for the money and fame. It was 11:30 p.m. on the night of October 7th, 2009, as a couple returned to Florida from North Carolina. They were midway between Homerville and Edith in Clinch County on US 441, an isolated area near the Okefenokee Swamp. The wife had just switched on an overhead light to consult a map and missed the sighting. But she could not avoid the stench that suddenly filled the car, described by her husband as a very powerful combination of sewer-like and a strong musky animal odor. The husband saw the creature, described as 7 feet in height and weighing up to 300 pounds. He said the creature was a tall, lanky, humanoid creature, not as ape-like as he would have thought. The hair was a very dark brown or black, long and stringy on the head, but only 2 to 3 inches long on the body. The arms reached nearly to its knees. I have a quick story about a shadow person. About 10 years ago, I was coming home late. Me, my ex-girlfriend, and her younger brother. Essentially, you come into the house, go through my living room, and get to the kitchen. Steps are going down to the basement. At the same time, I and her younger brother noticed a person, or what we thought was a person at the time, peeking around the corner. So I instantly ran downstairs and checked everything. There was no one there. The back door was locked from the inside. It was a little synchronicity because when I first tuned in to you guys that night, you had someone calling about a similar shadow man. When we were looking at this guy, I just recently got in contact with her younger brother just to confirm it because 2 people saw it. Have you seen the Silent Hill movie? Okay, do you remember the guy with the giant pointed head? Okay, this shadow figure looked exactly like that. Editor's note: he's most likely talking about Pyramid Head, and I'm starting to think it might be one of them like Heidi Hollies talks about. Basically, that's my story. I just never heard of 2 people seeing a shadow person at the same time. I live in a city now, but when I was a kid, I lived with my grandma in a very rural area of Florida that was known for being a dumping ground for murder victims. I never actually found a body whilst playing in the woods, but I did find a woman leaning over a creek in a dirty white dress at around 6 p.m. right as the sun was setting. I heard her faint sobbing in the distance and went to investigate. When I climbed over the embankment at the edge of the creek and finally saw her, she almost immediately started screaming at the top of her lungs, just staring into the water. Obviously, I wasn't a scaredy cat. I was a brave 12-year-old. So naturally, I instantly shit my pants and ran away. Still have no idea what that woman was doing, but that area was also known for having meth labs hidden in the woods, so that probably explains some of the strange people I met playing in that area. I think my story applies because I believe it is also Civil War related, but happened in Virginia. On August 25th at 9 p.m. in Fairfax Station, Virginia off Henderson Road, I believe that I heard a phantom ghost train whistle in or near my yard. I have lived in my home for 13 years, and I have never heard something so loud or so close to my home. On rare occasion over the years, I have heard a very distant train whistle from what I assume would be from the VRI or Amtrak trains Burke or Clifton, but nothing as loud as what I heard that night. My husband happened to be walking the dog in the backyard at the time, and I was already in bed. When he came inside, he said the hair on his arms was standing on end, and that the whistle sounded like the train was in the backyard. I'm wondering if anyone else has ever experienced something like this. I've since done a little research and wondered if our experience had something to do with something paranormal, a residual energy imprinted in the environment. I have learned that Fairfax Station was originally a station of the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. It was known as Lee's Station during its first year. During the Civil War in August 1862, Clara Barton tended to wounded Union and Confederate troops at the station after the Second Battle of Bull Run, Manassas, with headquarters at nearby St. Mary's Church very close to our home. I am a very logical person, and I just can't explain what I experienced. Maybe there's a connection considering the timing of this happening in late August of this year. It was obviously a very traumatic time during the Civil War, and particularly in August of 1862 in this immediate area. A time full of pain and suffering. I can't help but think that maybe the environment absorbed some of that energy, and the conditions must have been just right on the 25th for me to possibly hear that ghost train whistle so loud and clear. I'd be interested in hearing if anyone else has a similar story to share. Thanks for reading. When I was about 13, I was staying with a friend in January in the foothills of the Rockies in Colorado. While we were at his buddy's house, I walked to get food from a nearby gas station. On a small windy country road, a car took a turn too fast, skidded on the ice, and rolled over in my direction. I was lucky that there was woods right to the side, and the dense trees saved me from the vehicle. As I ran away, I looked back, and I could only see his arm dangling limply out of the broken driver's side window. I was scared, and I still get shivers about it today. I think the person ended up dying minutes later from injuries. But for 3 days after, I had strange dreams. They were very short, just small details. The feeling of grass, the moon, and a name I only remember the last name now, Alton. On the 4th night, I had gone to bed early, in an effort to get sleep. I ended up drifting off around 10 p.m.-ish, according to my friend's family. I heard a noise and woke up, but when I opened my eyes, I was laying right in front of a grave with the name Alton on it. It was a small village cemetery surrounded by pine trees. I would say it was less than 900 square feet. Despite it being mid-January in the mountains, there was no snow past the gate and in the cemetery. I was very cold and scared and managed to locate a fire watch tower, where they drove me back to my friend's house. According to them, they went to check on how I was doing at around 1 a.m., and I wasn't in bed. Their home security said that I had left their back porch at 12:40-ish in the morning. When the park rangers picked me up, it was almost 3 a.m. I explained my story to my friend's family, and they told me that there was no cemetery behind their house. I told them what the area looked like, and they said they had a clearing like that, but no graves. They offered to take a look if I would lead them, but I was too shaken. I also remember there being a small gate in his fence. I had to chase a stray ball, but before I went back home, that gate was gone, and it was just a solid fence. I don't know what happened, and I need answers. It's been bugging me recently, and I decided to ask about it. Please, if you have any solutions, respond. I wish to keep my name to myself, but I am willing to provide my account of what happened. This is a first-hand account of an encounter that I had with a creature of unknown origin. It was about 5 years ago, late at night. I went for a walk in the dark to clear my head one night when I got the feeling that I was being followed. Before I could say anything, a dark, fur-covered creature lunged out of the nearby bushes. It looked like a large man crossed with a wolf. It had deep green eyes and an elongated snout. The thing smelled like a rotting deer carcass, and it was very heavy. It slammed into me, knocking me to the ground, where it stood over me and growled as it looked me in the face. I kicked it, and it yelped before swiping at me, cutting my arm with its sharp claws. I was sure it was going to kill me, but then a noise similar to a car with a broken muffler backfiring scared it, and the creature ran away. Strangely, my arm no longer felt like it was bleeding, and the cut wasn't hurting anymore. My shirt sleeve was torn, but when I wiped away the wet blood from my arm, there wasn't even a scratch left behind. I was sure that it was just a bad dream, and so I headed back home. I never reported this because I was certain that nobody would believe me, and because it has been haunting me every day since. I haven't seen this creature since it ran off into the woods when that sound scared it off, but I sometimes worry that it might come back. I also don't know why the scratch on my arm was gone moments after the thing ran off. Everything I've found about it online has said that it was a werewolf, but I don't think those are real. It also isn't like the dogman or any other similar kind of creature. If you have heard of anything else like this, I would be interested to hear about it. Thank you. Growing up in rural Ohio, I lived on a stone road. I used to take the country roads to the closest town, which passed an old cemetery in the middle of a wooded semi-swamp. I used to pass there every day on my paper route as a kid in the 80s. Way in the back of the small cemetery was an old Washington monument-shaped grave that was broke at the base. The top section was a few feet away from the base. Every day I would lift that top section back onto its base and go ride to my route. The next day, without fail, the top section would be in exactly the same place. I did this every day for about 2 years. One day I looked at where the top section was laying, and I saw a very small glint of white marble poking through the ground. I moved the grass away and the dirt away and uncovered a small grave of a dead infant that matched the same last name as the name on the grave. I never lifted the top section ever again. Every time I go visit home, which is now a couple thousand miles away, I go back to that cemetery, and that top section is still laying on top of that infant grave. When I was younger, I was one of those kids who was all about being outdoors. I was in the Boy Scouts as soon as I was old enough to join and stayed in until I was 18. In Boy Scouts, there is a group called the Order of the Arrow, or OA in my young mind. It was like the special forces of scouting, and I was so excited when I was told I had been selected to join their prestigious ranks. So I packed my bags and went to Camp Del Risto in New Mexico, ready to see what I would have to do to become a member of OA. To join OA, you have to go through a trial weekend. I won't say much more about that because the trials that we had to go through are secrets. On the last night, though, we were split up into groups of 4, given map coordinates, a compass, and a bare minimum of what we would need, and told to survive for the night and then report to a second set of coordinates in the morning. Myself and the 3 other scouts started on our way, hiking for about 5 hours before we found a small clearing and confirmed it was our camping spot. From the northeast to the east, there was a thick, thorny bramble. We tried to find a way to explore it, but the waist-high vines were impossible to get through without something to cut them, so we ignored it and went on just exploring a bit around the camp and goofing off. As night came, we all started to settle down and make a fire. This would be our only source of light for the night. We stayed up for a bit after dark, chatting and telling stupid jokes and just having fun talking before we went to bed. We had one small tent, and still myself and one of the other scouts slept outside near the fire, while the other 2 slept inside. I don't remember the time because none of us had packed a watch, but it was well after the fire had gone out when I was shaken awake by one of the other scouts. He whispered in a quiet voice that would sometimes crack with fear, "There's someone outside our campsite." He then pointed up, moving from north to east outside the clearing, where a bright blue ball of light was. The odd thing was the core was bright, but did not seem to cast light on the trees. It was more like glowing than producing light per se. I stared at it, nervously curious, as he quietly belly crawled and woke the other 2 up. "It's just some other group messing around," one of the other scouts said as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, not trying to be quiet like the first warner. "But wait, that is where the bramble is," the 4th scout said. It was then that we realized how smooth the light was moving and how dead quiet the forest around us was. Nothing was making a noise, not even the moving light. I watched it for some time before accidentally falling asleep again. When I woke up, everyone else was already packing to make it to the rendezvous point. They said that whatever it was last night made them feel scared, and I was the only one to sleep after seeing it. The rest had remade the fire before it faded away, and they stayed up on watch. Sadly, this is where the excitement of the story ends. We packed up and made it to the point without incidents. I saw a double of my cat once. Granted, he's a black cat, and a lot of them will look similar, but I've had my boy for 7 years, and he is pretty big and has features I can recognize. I know this sounds silly, but the night before, I was going through my old emails and stuff, and I was left signed into an old Gmail account while I was on YouTube. So, all of my recommended stuff was all kinds of paranormal stuff that I used to look into. Out of the videos on my homepage, the most normal vid was a documentary of sorts about the Navajo Park Rangers. I had a friend who was wanting to be a park ranger, so I thought it'd be an interesting thing to watch. It was mostly normal park stuff, surveying the land and watching the water levels. Then it got weird. The guy talking even said, "If this subject is too much for you, you can leave now." It was a video of a guy talking to a lot of people with a PowerPoint-like presentation. Anyways, he started talking about skinwalkers, and I had actually never heard of them before. He said that if you think about them, you are more likely to have an encounter. Ignoring this, I ended up watching and listening to all kinds of skinwalker testimonies. So anyways, the next day, I walk out of the house through the garage to smoke a cig like I always do, and I didn't acknowledge my cat being in the garage at first. So when I saw a cat that looked exactly like mine in the yard, I called to him. My cat's a good boy. He listens to me and lets me know when he wants back outside and everything. I didn't think much of it at first when I saw this cat creeping up to the patio all slow and stealthy like, but I should have because my cat never does this. He mostly eats what I give him, as far as I know, and he will kill small game every now and then, like chipmunks and moles, and leave them for me as a present. But when he does this, he's close to the house, looking out towards the yard, and just sits in one spot and doesn't move till he strikes. This other cat came out from the woods behind my house, eyeing up the patio and the house, and moving really slow. And when I called out to him, thinking it was my cat, it stopped dead in its tracks, looked at me, and darted faster than any cat I've seen. And I have owned a lot of cats since I was a kid, and they were all fast. My cat hurt his toe when he was young, and he's still fast, but this cat was just gone so fast. I think to myself, well, that was weird. Then I went into the garage, which was in the complete opposite direction, and saw my cat just chilling. I picked him up and checked his foot because one of his claws always sticks out from when he got hurt by another animal, a long time ago, just to make sure it was him. I later heard that a cat is one of a skinwalker's preferred animals to turn into, because it's easier to get into houses that way. This was maybe 6 months ago or so, and I still have my cat. I also heard that if you call them by their name, they will run off and die somewhere. My cat has a human name, so maybe I got lucky when I called out to it, assuming that's what it might have been and everything. When I was young, I used to live a fair way out from town, about 50 kilometers to the nearest store, so we never saw people. When I was about 11, my mom left me home alone for a couple days while she went to an equine show. All fine ace dandy, I was happy. Got to stay up late playing video games. Anyway, 1 a.m. rolls around and I head to my room to get ready for bed. I flick on my light and out my window in the pitch darkness, I somehow see a tall 7-foot human shadow walk past my window. It was as dark as the night outside, but somehow I could see it outlined in the darkness. The veranda outside was old and rickety. It would creak and groan when a 20-kilo dog walked on it. But this thing moved completely silently. It didn't stop or look in my window when the light came on, just walked casually by like it didn't even notice. The direction it was walking, it would walk off the veranda into the horse stables and trigger the auto lights, never triggered the lights. Either way, it scared the living shit out of me. I panicked as a kid does and tried to call Mom, couldn't get her on the phone. So I camped in the living room inside a blanket fort with dogs for safety. We live in a densely forested area, borderline rainforest in the U.S. Northwest. The land we built our modest house on has no known history of being previously lived on, though Native Americans may have previous to white colonization. Our experience has primarily been with cats. But these cats are not living. We began seeing a few different ones over the past 15 years. Sightings come in spurts. We will have several experiences, then nothing for months. The cats are usually sitting on the toilet, near the bathroom sink, walking and scampering quickly into or out of the bedrooms or out the front door. Once, my daughter has her teen friends over and 3 of them saw a black and white cat come out from the bedroom and run under a chair at the table they were sitting at. At least 9 people have seen them. They are orange, beige, black, and white. One time my mother was visiting in Hull, she was talking, we heard 2 disembodied meows about seconds apart. My one and only live cat was asleep on my lap at the time. My daughter and I have both felt an unseen cat run up against our legs while standing at the bathroom sink. We keep our live cat's food and water in the bathroom. Our live cat is an orange Manx who is a 100% indoor boy. He has a short tail. The orange ghost cats has a normal tail. We have never owned any of these spectral cats, but we suspect they were area cats who met a bad end with dogs, coyotes, or worse. I wasn't sure if I should share this story with anyone outside of my small circle of people that were there. But I want to share my experience in hopes that it saves someone's life or gives an understanding of what someone else has experienced. It was late fall of 2010 in northern Canada. I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning, just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage over rapids all day. We decided to set up camp just over halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the rest of the journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone bedded down for the night, I decided to go grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank of the river, just out of reach of the light from the campfire. Out from the tree line about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I heard the noise and focused on that spot. I felt kind of funny, dizzy, and lightheaded, and I could smell this putrid odor, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the trees start to morph and move ever so slightly, and began to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness, and along the tree line, I could hear this voice coming from there. I recognized it. The voice sounded like one of my relatives who had recently passed. The face took the shape of my relative. "Hello," they said. "I've missed you. Come see me." I smiled and stepped forward a bit, but stopped to analyze the situation. My relative's face stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheeks began to fall away, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it at all, so I started to back away and make my way to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice, and I was further away from the firelight. The voice became angry and began shouting at me to come here. So I turned to run away, but as I looked back one more time, I saw the most disgusting thing I had ever seen. It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes, and a hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin. I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the river bank, and I could hear the heavy breaths and the stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the top of the river bank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped up. I gripped and tore the grass, trying to lift myself, and yelled as loud as I could. Then finally my voice came back and I yelled, "Someone has my leg." My brother woke up and ran over to where I was. Then he pulled me up and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw and that it looked like my relative, but not. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, but my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too, I know." That solidified it. He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun was coming up and went back home. We haven't shared that story with anyone out of fear of being labeled as crazy or liars. I've had nightmares and couldn't sleep for months afterward. I would see things and dark figures looking into my window or hear whispers when I was walking home at night. Eventually, I saw this dark figure daily. I went to medicine men and shamans for help, but I've learned that the ceremonies only relieve it temporarily. Friends have given me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I learned that it could only do this if it touched you, which it did. Ever since that night, I've been on edge when I enter any forest or wooded area, which sucks because I loved being outdoors and hunting and in nature. Now I always feel like I need to keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Anyways, make your own conclusions about this. I've paid a price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They are real, I can attest to that. My two cousins and I were camping at South Umpqua Falls in Oregon. It was dark, and we were sitting around the campfire talking when suddenly there was the most disgusting smell. We were scared to death, and we didn't know why. We turned around to see where the smell was coming from. About 15 yards from us stood a huge, hairy man with half of his body behind a tree looking at us. We were so scared that we ran to the car and stayed the night in it. We were too afraid to drive the 70 miles through the woods back to Medford. This is too weird to not share in case someone is left lurking. My best friend Matt and I went hiking on the Pinhoti Trail in northeast Alabama. This particular area I fairly secluded. The only people that live near are the kind of people that don't want to be found. We pulled up to the parking spot for the trailhead, and we are followed by a wildlife officer. He just pulls in behind us, watches us get out of the car, we wave, he leaves. We begin our hike. The trail is fairly easy for most of the way, and it's well worn for about the first 2 miles. Then it crosses a creek bed, and this seems to be about as far as most people choose to go. We continue for another 2 or so miles. We are now about 4.5 miles from the car. We decide it's break time. As we are sitting enjoying the nature, Matt looks over and sees something through some leaves. Something blue like a tarp. It's probably 75 yards off the trail, and we wouldn't have seen the blue had we not stopped in that exact location. And it was fall, so few leaves were on the trees. We go check it out. We cross another creek bed. Someone has semi-dammed the creek with rocks, sticks, and the like, forming a shallow pond. We continue and find makeshift stairs made of rock, limbs, and mud. We climb the stairs up onto this small hill. We see the tarp. It's really a blanket or sleeping bag of sorts. It is in the middle of a clearing. The trees around it have carved out sections which hold candles. There is wax of about 5 different colors dripping down the trees. Clearly several candles had been burned here over several years. There was a fire pit off to the side, and it was somewhat pleasant. At first we thought it was just someone's getaway place in the woods, until Matt sees that there are bloody handprints on the rocks around the fire pit. These prints seemed pretty intentionally placed. We began to walk around the place, and on the other side of the clearing were little skeletons, bird feathers, fur, what was once probably a few rodents with their innards removed. It was time to go. Quickly. We went back the way we came, hoping no one would see us on the way. This is the first time I've mentioned this other than to my close friends and family, and it took place in the Dismal Swamp Canal heading to the Lake Drummond Reserve, just outside of North Carolina heading into Virginia. I cannot verify that it was a Bigfoot encounter because my son or I did not see what was harassing us. What we did experience, however, I still cannot find any other plausible explanation for. The first strange occurrence happened right around the historical Cornland School, and increased to constant rock throwing and pacing on both banks almost as soon as we entered the feeder ditch. while we were rowing a raft toward Lake Drummond to camp in the reserve. I continued towards our planned destination despite the rocks getting closer the further we rowed. I only turned around after we heard something get in the water, and we could hear it slowly moving toward us. I fired a rifle shot in that direction, and we heard it exit the canal and run through what looked like a clearing given the low light. We then heard what sounded like a conversation between a man and a woman, but we couldn't make out any words or language. But we were both certain we heard a man and woman talking that sounded like a couple in their 20s. Once we had reached the exact point it began, exiting the ditch back into the main canal, it had ended along with the pacing on either side of us. Now I've read reports and heard stories of UFO sightings coinciding and being connected to Bigfoot encounters, but never thought that this connection was probable, and personally believed it was just added into some stories as a way to mock Bigfoot believers. But as we were rowing to the nearest boat ramp, which was Ballahack Boat Launch, I was looking straight up into the sky, seeing an object flying with my first thought being, now why doesn't that plane have his nav lights on? It took me a few seconds to realize what I was seeing was a triangular craft that itself looked like it was dully illuminated with 3 brighter lights also in the triangle pattern. I said to my son, without ever looking away to know what he was looking at, "Hey, do you see that?" His instant reply was, "Yes." This was immediately followed by the fear and stress he was holding in from the odd encounter minutes earlier sent him into an emotional panic. But if you would like to know the exact times, areas, and all the details that occurred throughout the night, I would be glad to help. In the first case, a high school teacher was on a solitary day hike to Linton Lake when she noticed what she first thought was a very large man striding down the opposite shore. She soon realized that this creature was covered in fur and was far too large to be a man. It did not see her as she was standing in the shadows of the forest, gazing across the lake. She watched it stride down the lake shore for a minute or so before it turned and walked into the forest. In telling her story, she used the term massive several times to describe her amazement at the size of this creature. She also related a sense of awe at encountering a creature which she had previously regarded as myth, yet she felt no fear of it. This occurred in the late 70s. It was me, my friend, and 2 girls were hanging out one night and decided to go explore this abandoned house in the middle of nowhere. It was the middle of the night and it was pitch black. No lights anywhere. The house was really beat up with old mattresses and holes in the walls. There were old chicken coops, weeds everywhere, and trees that surrounded the whole place. We had to walk there by foot because there was no way to get there with a car. We had known about this place for a long time and decided that we should bring a flashlight. We were ultimately trying to freak the girls out. So we walked up through all the brush and approached the front door. My buddy was first in line, followed by me and the 2 other girls. He had the flashlight. We heard some rustling in the brush about 15-20 feet away, which made us hesitate. We waited it out for about 10 seconds and decided it was probably a rat or something. As soon as we took 1 step forward, we heard the noise again, except this time it was even closer. My friend turned the flashlight on, and about 10 feet away from was a guy. The man froze in mid-stride as soon as the light hit him. He was wearing a cowboy hat with full denim. He had a black bandana covering his face and gloves. We all literally stood there for about 10 seconds, felt like much longer, and he didn't say a word. All my friend said was, "Sorry, we're leaving." The man didn't say anything and just stood there mid-stride. About 5 seconds later, I had enough of that shit and I yelled, "Run," and took off running. I didn't even wait for the girls, it was everyone for themselves. We noped out of there so fast, the girls were probably 20 yards behind us. We looked back and saw the guy shining a light chasing after us, so we just kept sprinting. We lost him after a few minutes and booked it back to one of the girls' house. The end. There was no closure. That was it. I still have no idea what that guy was doing at that place in the middle of the night. He was trying to sneak up behind us, but luckily we caught him before he did. A kid-sized Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles backpack and sleeping bag. They looked like they had been there for several months at least. The bag was full of thousands of packs of matches and the deed to a house in Washington state. This happened in Maryland. Edit. I forgot about a much better story. I was hiking in Southern Virginia and came to a shelter. At this point, it was about an hour until sundown, and 2 other hikers had already set up camp and gotten a fire going. So I decided to sling my tent up and make some dinner. I never sleep in those funky shelters. Anyway, at some point I noticed that there is a guy in the far back corner of this shelter. It looks like he is sitting facing the wall, but it's hard to tell with him being in the shadow of the corner. I didn't think much of it. I was hungry. So I'm sitting there munching on my shitty rehydrated dinner as the sun is going down. As my eyes began to adjust to the darkness, I glanced over towards the shelter and suddenly realized that I can see the whites of the person's eyes in the shelter. This dude had smeared soot from the fire pit all over his face and body and had been sitting in the shadows watching the other hikers and myself the entire time. I tried to stealthily let the other hikers know what was up and get the F out of there. I walked a few miles further down the trail and then cut to the side and hiked about a mile off the trail before I felt comfortable setting up camp. My family went backpacking in Yosemite, and one night they woke up to a bunch of noises. When they opened their tents, they saw a mother and 2 cubs stealing all of their bear cans. They had to chase the bears away and get their food back because they were still a couple days from the main valley, so they started to chuck rocks and things at them. Finally, my dad threw a large log at the mother. The mother snarled, dropped the cans, and ran away. My dad looks back at it, and he's kinda scared that he did that because it could have turned out a lot worse due to the fact that it was a mother bear and her cubs. TL Dr. Dad threw a log at a mother bear and her cubs to save their backpacking food. As a park ranger, I had grown accustomed to the rhythmic sounds of nature, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of animals, and the gentle flow of the river. However, on this particular morning, an eerie silence settled over the woods, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. As I followed the trail deeper into the forest, I stumbled upon a clearing that sent shivers down my spine. There, scattered amidst the trees, were remnants of tents and camping gear. Abandoned. It was as if the occupants had vanished into thin air. I called out, but only the echo of my own voice responded. Frowning, I examined the area more closely. Strange symbols were etched onto the trees, unfamiliar to me. It was then that I began to piece together the puzzle, the inexplicable disappearances, the mutilated remnants of the campsite, and the haunting symbols all pointed to a force beyond the realm of my understanding. Driven by curiosity and a sense of duty, I delved deeper into the investigation. I scoured the park's historical records and consulted with local historians, desperate for any clue that could unravel the mystery. It was during my research that I stumbled upon an ancient Native American cryptid named the Wendigo. According to the legend, the Wendigo was a malevolent spirit that roamed the woods, possessing those who succumbed to the darkest depths of hunger. It was said to be a cannibalistic entity, its insatiable appetite driving it to consume not only the flesh of humans, but the very essence of their souls. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, a chill ran down my spine. The Wendigo, a creature of nightmares, spoken of in hushed whispers around campfires, was now more than a legend. It was a living, breathing terror haunting Pinecrest National Park. Determined to put an end to the malevolent creature that plagued the land, I armed myself with knowledge and a resolve that belied the fear simmering within me. Night after night, I patrolled the park, searching for signs of the Wendigo. Strange occurrences became my new norm: ominous shadows, disembodied whispers, and the constant feeling of being watched. One fateful night, as the moon cast an eerie glow over the forest, I encountered the Wendigo. Towering and grotesque, it emerged from the shadows with eyes that glowed like burning embers. The stench of decay hung heavy in the air as it unleashed a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the trees. My heart raced as I faced the embodiment of ancient terror. Armed with a sense of duty and a shotgun, I confronted the Wendigo, only for him to suddenly disappear once I shot him in darkness. He let out a spine-chilling scream and dissipated into the shadows. Afraid, I stood amidst the trees. The once haunting silence was somehow changed. I can't explain how. All in all, that's my encounter. You can believe it or not. I don't care. I had been living in this house by myself for a few months, and it wasn't long before I started to notice some strange occurrences. Every night at precisely 10 p.m., I would hear the unmistakable sounds of cat toys, like the jingling of bells, followed by footsteps in the living room. It was unnerving, to say the least, and I made it a habit to lock myself in the bedroom each night to avoid any potential encounters with whatever might be lurking in the shadows. As a naturally paranoid person, I was always sure to lock and bolt every door in the house whenever I arrived home. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, but I had no choice but to carry on with my daily routine. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a series of loud, heavy footsteps outside my room, followed by what sounded like a door slamming shut. Fear gripped me as I hesitantly turned on all the lights in the house and ventured out to investigate. My dog was in the living room, lying on the couch and staring at me with an unnerving intensity as I discovered that the front door was wide open. Panic set in, and I couldn't help but feel as if someone or something was toying with me. Whenever I shared my experiences with others, no one seemed to believe me. They dismissed my stories as the product of an overactive imagination, but I knew what I had heard and seen. It wasn't until my boyfriend spent the night at my place that someone else finally witnessed the strange phenomena that plagued my home. That night, as we lay in bed, my boyfriend heard the familiar sounds of footsteps and what seemed like dog paws in the living room. He initially brushed it off, assuming it was just my dog wandering around. But when he realized that the dog was fast asleep beside us in bed, his skepticism turned to genuine concern. The incidents continued to haunt me for the duration of my stay in that house, and to this day, I still can't fully explain what was happening. The memories of those eerie nights remain etched in my mind, serving as a chilling reminder that sometimes the unknown can be far more terrifying than anything we could ever imagine. When I was 8, I had one of those life-size rag dolls with yarn hair. One night I woke up, and she was waving her arms around while placed on my beanbag. I know it's not malicious, I know it sounds crazy, I know it sounds like I was dreaming. But I wasn't. She was moving around all by herself. To this day, I don't F with dolls. Edit. So when I saw her moving, I got super scared and hid under my blanket for like 10 minutes with my heart racing, frozen in fear, building up the courage to run out of my room. Eventually, I ran out of my room to get my parents, whose bedroom was downstairs, and my dad came and got the doll and put her in the living room. I was too scared to sleep in my room, so I went to sleep in my brother's bed, which I would do when I had bad dreams and stuff. We heard farting and magazine pages flipping, and at first thought it was my dad. It was like 4 a.m. at this point, who just couldn't go back to sleep. But when we were yelling out for my dad, he didn't answer. So we were like, oh my God, it's Samantha the doll. Since I was with my big brother, I was brave, and we started shouting at her from his bedroom, saying we weren't scared, and we were gonna kill her and all this Mau. I was so traumatized by this living doll, though, that my parents brought her to my Nana's house. It was a Christmas gift from a family friend that I didn't want to get rid of because I felt bad and didn't want the doll to come back and be mad at me. But I would go for sleepovers at my Nana's multiple times every year, and when I would go, she would take the doll out of the playroom and put it in the back room and lock the door. It was always so hard to fall asleep, but the dog would always sleep with me, which would help. Fast forward when I was 15 and having a ton of mental health issues unrelated to the doll law, and a new med ended up making me have some paranoia and see a few things, including a little girl a few times. My aunt was upset over my struggles, and hearing the little girl visuals, she went to my nana's, took the doll, and burned it in the backyard to end my fear of it once and for all. So that's the full story and what happened with the doll. I really hope this doesn't get buried. I swear on my mother's grave and my future children's graves that this happened. When I was around the age of 16-ish, me and my younger sister 12 were sitting at the dinner table alone. My mom had just left the house after she had served us our dinner. She served us fish, something we really hated. We were sitting at the table just miserably staring at our food, not talking and reluctant to eat, but knowing we had to or else our mother would get angry at us. It was a small square table near the entrance of our apartment, and my sister was sitting to the left of me. Across from me was an empty chair. All of a sudden, the chair across the table from me started rocking back and forth, pivoting from the back two legs of the chair. I initially thought that my sister was rocking the chair with her foot. It was the only logical explanation. I turned to my left to see if I noticed any movement from my sister. She's just staring at me with a serious expression and as still as a rock, absolutely no movement from her. The chair, however, is still rocking. It doesn't get more cliché than this, but I got up and started to lean down to see what was moving the chair, and of course, the chair stops moving. I have asked my sister every year since then if she was lying about not rocking the chair, and she has not gone back on her word to this day. So ghosts exist, I guess. Edit. I know some people are downvoting because most paranormal ghost stuff is cap. But to be honest, even after that happened, even I had a hard time believing it happened myself, as weird as it sounds, and I lived it. There's just no other logical explanation to explain why that happened. That wasn't the only time weird shit happened in that apartment either, so I honestly wasn't surprised at that point. It just wasn't as clear-cut like that before. So, a little bit of background. I am from Spain, with family from Italy. This story is 100% true. Me, my dad, and my brother are all three familiar with camping, nature, etc. We don't get scared easily, and we aren't really superstitious or whatever. Also, excuse me for any grammatical errors I might make in this. English is not my first language. Now the story. This happened in 2010, I believe. I was 8 years old then, and we were on summer vacation in Italy, in the region of Tuscany, where some of our family is from. We, brother, dad, and me were hiking in the country, far away from any towns or any other form of big civilization. We were not very familiar with this route, though. All of a sudden, we stumble across what looks like an abandoned Tuscan farmhouse. Not very big, though. We all look around and yell, asking whether there was someone. It looked very abandoned. The door was missing, plants all growing over the place. Safe to say, no one lived there. So, since we love adventure, and it didn't seem like a bad plan to do with 2 children, we decide to take a look at the place. As we are going to enter the house, out of nowhere comes a barn owl flying out of the house. It was dark in there, so we had a quick scare, but nothing too bad. It's just an owl, right? Now we enter the house, and we just find the typical stuff you would imagine to find when you're in an abandoned house. Cutlery and plates on the ground, a candle, some old paintings, nothing really valuable though. Now we see an old wooden ladder that leads up to a hole in the ceiling. It was not a very big hole. My father couldn't fit. To give you an idea, he is like 6 feet 2, and so since I was the oldest of the 2 kids, I would go up and tell them what I saw upstairs. Now I went up the ladder and got in a room, where I could see barely because the windows were covered with wood boards. So I could make out some stuff by a few sun rays that would get in through the gaps. I could see graffiti signs typical for an abandoned house, right? And I saw another room, so I told my father and brother that I would advance to there and see what was up. As I opened the rotten wooden door, I immediately stood still. A disgusting, rotten smell penetrated my nose. I almost had to throw up. I wanted to know what caused this bad smell. Then, in the corner of the room, I could make out a silhouette. I got closer to investigate what it could be, and I could barely make out that it was the lifeless body of a dog, a big dog. And spicy detail, the body was skinned. No fur, nothing. Just pure rotting flesh in the shape of a big dog. I don't remember how long I just stood there frozen. But I woke up from my shock with the screams of my brother, because apparently the barn owl had gotten back inside the house, and it almost hit him. So my dad yelled at me to come back, and I gladly obeyed. When I got back downstairs, I told him what I had seen, and the look he gave me was that of a man who is scared to shit, but doesn't want to admit it in order to not scare his young kids. He just got close to my ear and whispered to run. We ran out of that place and never got back, or even close to the route leading to it. Now, it might not be very scary compared to other stories on this page, or very backwoods related, but I thought I'd give it a go since someone said they wanted to hear stories from outside the Northern American sphere. It was still in the country part, and there were woods around it, though. I am sorry in advance for my English. As a veteran who has driven extensively in Iraq and Kuwait, I have seen my fair share of accidents and tragedies on the road. One incident that has stayed with me was the sight of a decapitated man lying on the side of the road. He had been involved in a racing accident and his head was propped up on his stomach. It was a gruesome sight, but unfortunately, such incidents were not uncommon in those parts of the world. In another instance, I witnessed a woman leaving her car running on the side of a busy street in Kuwait City with her 2 toddlers inside. I couldn't help but feel anxious about the potential danger they were in. One wrong move, and they could have easily ended up as roadkill. These are just some of the many incidents I have witnessed while driving in these regions. It's a sobering reminder of how dangerous the roads can be and how quickly things can turn tragic. It's something that has stayed with me, and I am grateful for every safe journey I have had since then. I had always been fascinated by the stories my Native American friend, Tall Bear, would share with me about the legends and myths of his people. As a lover of the outdoors, I would often join him on his expeditions into the wilderness, seeking adventure and learning about the ancient traditions and beliefs of his tribe. One day, Tall Bear invited me to accompany him to a remote area of the forest where he had discovered something unusual. He had found a 25-30-foot section of barbed wire fence knocked down, and one of the goats from a nearby farm was missing. Intrigued, I agreed to join him in investigating the strange occurrence. As we made our way through the dense forest, Tall Bear shared with me some of the eerie stories of unknown creatures that were said to roam the land, creatures that defied explanation and were deeply rooted in his people's folklore. Upon reaching the site, we found the goat lying on the ground with a broken neck, its bowels missing, and its tongue sticking out. The sight was gruesome, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over me. Tall Bear, however, remained stoic, carefully examining the area for any clues as to what could have caused such a horrifying scene. The next day, we returned to the site to continue our investigation, only to find the goat's lifeless body hanging over a low tree limb. As we carefully inspected the surrounding area, we discovered enormous 16-inch tracks leading away from the scene. The tracks were unlike anything we had ever seen before, and we couldn't help but wonder if we had stumbled upon evidence of one of the unknown creatures from Tall Bear's stories. Determined to learn more, we decided to follow the tracks deeper into the forest. As we ventured further, the air grew colder, and a sense of unease settled over us. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched by something unseen, something lurking just beyond our line of sight. Despite our growing fear, we pressed on, driven by our curiosity and the hope of discovering the truth behind the mysterious tracks and the fate of the unfortunate goat. As we delved deeper into the heart of the forest, I couldn't help but feel a newfound respect for the ancient stories and wisdom of Tall Bear's people. The unknown species we were tracking may have been the stuff of legends, but our pursuit of it was as real as the ground beneath our feet. Whatever we would find at the end of the trail, I knew that our journey together had brought us closer to the mysteries of the natural world and the secrets of Tall Bear's ancestors. And in that moment, as we stepped further into the unknown, I felt a profound connection to the land, its creatures, and the rich tapestry of stories that had shaped the lives of generations before us. I was tree planting near Smithers, British Columbia, about an hour and a half into the mountains on dirt roads. I tried my best to just forget this incident even occurred, as I simply could not find a way to rationalize what happened. I don't care who believes me or not, by the way, but what happened is this. It was almost midnight and I was trying to sleep in my tent. My tent was near a bunch of standing dead trees that would creak when the wind picked up. A very loud and distinct sound. Now on this particular night it was dead silent and still. I started to hear sticks cracking and steps being taken that slowly got closer over the course of about 15 minutes. It was loud enough I was certain there was a bear approaching my tent. It got so close that it had to be no further than 15 feet from my tent, cracking sticks and padding around the forest floor. I decided to yell out very loudly, "Silence." I was answered with nothing but deafening silence. No sound of the creature fleeing or doing anything at all. I sat in silence, too scared to move, trying to rationalize to no conclusion. About 20 minutes of dead silence later, I heard the eeriest, unnatural, and unexplainable noise. It was the exact same timbre and volume and just basically the same sound as the trees outside creaking. But instead of being a regular creak, it began, and then held the exact same note of creak for a full 5 seconds or even longer. It was like an unnatural drone that was obviously not a tree creaking. There was not a hint of wind or any other trees creaking as per usual. I got barely any sleep and the next day was tough, and I just had to forget about it. I didn't ever make the connection that skinwalkers are known to imitate sounds like that until a few weeks ago. This happened in July 2022. If anyone has had a similar experience or has any ideas of what this could have been, I'd love to hear. As of right now, the dreams have died down, but this is something that most people don't believe when I tell them this. A few months ago, I constantly had extremely agonizing migraines followed with brain fog. This always happened at night from what I can recall, and there was always an ominous mechanical humming buzzing over the roof of my house. After the first few nights of this occurring, it had occurred again, but this time I believe I had actually seen what the source of this sound was. What makes this more disturbing is that I live far from any other airports that may be in a 12-kilometer radius of the area I live in. I saw this colossal triangular aircraft with 3 red but dim lights on its corners. There were green, stroking lights on its sides and white lights around the center of the structure. It moved quickly but low enough for me to notice it. Sadly, I was too slow to capture a photo of it before it got out of view. After this incident, I kept having extremely detailed dreams about these strange aircrafts. One of which in particular was one of the most detailed ones. I was in my house with my mother and suddenly I felt the urge to go outside and look at the sky. I had my camera with me, and when I had walked outside, I saw this huge triangular craft. I took a few photos of it, and when I went back inside, time had seemingly accelerated from dawn to sunset. I woke up from that dream with a short, but excruciatingly painful migraine. The second dream took place in what looked like a UFO assembly line with some sort of gas giant outside a window in space or something. I was sitting in some sort of waiting room and a man dressed in what looked like some sort of space suit took me on a tour. I saw all sorts of UFO types, cross-shaped, dome, cigar, triangular, cube, etc. A few days after this dream, I had seen the strangest shit I had ever seen in my life. I am sorry if my grammar is bad while writing this because I'm currently on mobile. I was standing outside with my friends drinking some Sprite, and an hour after they left, I saw this rectangular, dark metallic object with red lights on its corners hovering by the side of my roof. There was a glass panel on the side of it with something I can't recall what inside, controlling it. I dropped my phone in horror before I could take a pic, but it didn't hit the ground. It felt like time stopped. I caught something moving in the corner of my eye. I glanced over to my left and saw this gray, cylindrical thing with contorted legs and a horn with a glowing end on what would be its face. The way it moved will haunt me for a long time. It was jittery but disturbingly smooth, as if it was rotoscoped into reality. After that, time leaped forwards, and it was as if I had been standing in that same position for an entire night. Walked in my house and immediately fell asleep. Tried to get my mind off what happened that night, but couldn't. I was not under any drugs or intoxication during this. I am turning 30 in a few months, and I can still recall so vividly the 3 shadow people I encountered in my home somewhere between the ages of 8 and 12. A little background on me. I moved to a small town upstate, New York, at around 7 years old. When this happened, my mother had recently just departed from my father, kicked him out, LOL. My family had a weird vibe pretty much. I wasn't close with my older sister, and we were 1 year apart. My youngest sister, I don't believe, was born yet, so it was just us 3 and my mom. My brother had a best friend that lived up the street, and I'd describe us as Ed and Eddie, LOL, just 3 young kids causing havoc around the neighborhood. Also, if it counts for anything, we grew up very Christian family, especially on mom's side. But when we moved, we stopped going to church as often. One of my sweetest grandmother memories. I recall when I was young, before we would leave my grandmother's house in the city of New Archiao, she would anoint us with oil on our foreheads and say a prayer before we left to go back home upstate. Anyway, I remember it being like any other day. We played outside, Game Boy Color or Advance, I don't know, traded Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and just had fun all day long. We came in, showered, and settled down. I guess it was probably summer when school was out because I was up late and my sister was too, but I didn't know this at the time. My brother was knocked out next to me with his head facing the wall, and I was on the other edge of the bed with my head facing the door to his room, which was wide open. My brother and I were so close, man, which explains why I was making myself comfortable in his room. It was pretty much a real brotherly bond, I would say, and I kind of get emotional thinking about it because nothing was ever the same since that day. Anyway, I'm laying there just trying to go to sleep, I guess, and I just get this odd feeling that I'm being watched. All of the lights were off, and we were no longer in a city environment where there is light even in darkness. Upstate NY is dark when the lights go out, especially in the house. From my brother's doorway, the hallway made an L shape. If you turn right and walk down the hall, there was my sister's room, also my room at the time, where you can go straight ahead towards the stairs. Obviously, I'm staring straight ahead towards the stairs. I'm staring now because I can't sleep with this odd feeling. And within seconds, a tall shadow began to appear in the distance on the stairs, and it was freaky. Because, man, you can see the outline of this thing in the pitch dark. Blackness. This thing was blacker than the blackness itself, and the eyes were the only thing that I could really see. His outline was tall, he had a tall hat, and he was just skinny with long-looking fingers. Now my heart is pounding, and I'm pretty much thinking WTF is going on. So I start blinking nervously because I didn't believe I was seeing this. As I blinked, the other 2 appeared closer than the last one. They were no longer on the stairs, but in the hallway. One wore a hood and carried what seemed like a stick, sort of like the Grim Reaper. And the other one was large, like wide and fat. The eyes were large and just gave me a bad-up feeling. I literally laid there in fear, and I tried to refrain from blinking at one point, because it seemed like every time I blinked, they got closer. I promise you, the tears were flowing, and I made the mistake of blinking, and it was like they just appeared right in the doorway. And that's when I couldn't hold my fear in any longer, man. I let out the most excruciating scream. I was scared for dear life. I felt like those things were going to kill me. I just started screaming loud, and my mother was heavy-footed, man. All I heard was her come stomping from her room at the end of the hall and into the hall. She flipped on the hallway light switch and came running stomping into the room. I swear it was like an elephant coming to save her baby, man. My mom is such a graceful woman, I promise, LOL. But I always remember her being so heavy-footed when she would move around the home, probably because she was often rushing everywhere. I guess raising kids will do that to you, LOL, but man, that day felt like no other. She scooped me up and took me back to her room and was just consoling me, asking me what the hell happened. She was scared that I was scared. But I was out of it. It took me a while to calm down and explain to her what I saw. I wasn't only afraid of her reaction, but I was always a thinker back then and even now. I just thought at the time, even if I told her, what could she do? It's not like she could beat them up or something, because I knew that whatever those things were just wasn't from this world or realm. It was really odd and terrifying. It had to be like 2 or 3 of them at the time, and I remember her picking up the phone and calling my grandmother, who was and still is a hardcore Christian. She called and they spoke. I remember her trying to leave the room, and I would squeal because I didn't want to be left without the lights on. Her room light was still off, but she ended up turning it on for my comfort and leaving the room to speak to my grandmother. She came back shortly after with what I perceived as a bottle of water back then, but as I know now, it was holy water. I watched my mother bless her entire room and then leave her room to run through the entire home and bless it too. I saw her splashing the bottle on the walls and everything. I remember sleeping in my mom's room for months after that. I couldn't sleep anywhere else. I was traumatized. I never saw those things again after that day, but I had some wild experiences in life after that. The oddest thing was that my brother slept through it all, not waking up once. Doesn't recall the day or anything. Since then, he's had so many hardships in life and has been in and out of jail and crazy outbursts. I don't know if it's connected, but I just felt a shift in his being after that day. The next day, I remember having breakfast and my older sister asking me why I was screaming last night. Embarrassed, of course, LOL, I told her what I saw, but I was shocked when she just stared at me and said, "I saw it too." I remember thinking to myself, well, if you saw it too, then why the F wasn't you screaming? LOL, but I never discredited her, nor mentioned it again. She just turned 31, and I'm turning 30 as I told you above, so I'm thinking about revisiting this experience by calling her and asking her if she remembers, and I think it would be dope to get that moment on voice record. It's crazy because I recently revisited this conversation with my mother, and she confirmed it all and was surprised I even remembered. I couldn't forget something that traumatic. Remember I told you my brother had a best friend that lived up the street, and we were all like Ed and Eddie. Well, about 2 or 3 years ago, he came to visit me for an extended period of time. I was living in a TL with my girlfriend in our new apartment. I made him comfy and at home, obviously, because he's my brother too, just from another mother and father-in-law. We started chatting about our childhood memories. Our adult relationship is completely different than our childhood ones. My brother and him are still best friends, but they are on 2 different paths in life. He now has a child and a long-term girlfriend. He moved across the country. He has a career, and he's doing really good for himself. My brother is still navigating life, emotionally underdeveloped, I'd say, and a bit lost at the moment. So their relationship is more moral support, a friend that's going to always be there type thing, if that makes sense. Whereas him and I have the more difficult and in-depth conversations. I remember us talking about conspiracy theories, spirituality, political crap, our fathers being Freemasons and stuff like that, and it later led to talking about spirits and shadow people. I remember him telling me, "Man, just don't think I'm crazy when I tell you this," and then went on to tell me how he saw some tall figure in his house when he used to live up the street from me as a child. And for some odd reason at that time, I asked him if the figure was a skinny guy, and he said, skinny with a tall hat and long fingers. I swear we both had like a twin telepathy moment, and at that moment we both knew that we experienced one of the same entities. He told me his story, and I told him mine, and we both just sat there disturbed. It was weird and creepy, and even unto this day we phone each other up and talk about the crazy experiences we had and are still having in this world today. So one night I'm driving home from a friend's place. It's pretty late, like 2 or 3 in the morning. I live in the suburbs and the streets are relatively tight, so I am typically driving pretty slow. Don't speed in your neighborhood. Happy neighbors are good neighbors. I'm nearing the turn to enter my close, and from a distance I see what looks to be someone outside. Pretty unusual this time of night, as it's all young families and retirees around me. As I get closer, it's definitely a kid, which is even stranger. Like, doesn't this kid have parents? They're standing directly under the street light with a raincoat on, not raining, and their hood up over their head so that the shadow cast completely covers their face. I know my neighborhood pretty well, and while I don't know most by name, you know who has kids and who doesn't. This corner house 100% doesn't have any kids. That kid's gaze was locked onto my truck, unwavering, turning their head and staring straight at me as I slowly pass, turning right towards my house. This kid only a few feet away. This kid did a full 180 with their body and watched me drive down my street. While I only lived 6 or so houses into the close, it's just enough I lost sight of the kid. It was super unsettling. I couldn't even quite explain to you the feeling I got from it. I back into my driveway, put my truck in park, think about what I saw, and say, F it, I've got to check this out. Back into drive and back down the street. Maybe 20 seconds tops since I passed, and kid's gone. Vanished. The roads are straight enough in any given direction that in that short amount of time that kid would have had to straight up sprint to stand a chance of being out of sight. F-demon child is gone. I went home, parked quick, and didn't take my time getting inside and locking the door. To this day, never saw the kid again or anything that's given me a bad vibe like that. Damned if I know what was going on. If it was a prank, hats off, you did it, kid. I was a live-in caretaker for a 94-year-old woman with Alzheimer's for about a year and a half. She had moved into her daughter's home deep in the woods of middle of nowhere, Washington. Marie was prone to say weird things like that her sister deceased, mother deceased, and husband deceased were in the house or outside regularly. I had been working with dementia patients for a few years by this point, so it never bothered me. Marie was terrified of the woods. She would tell me about how there's dangerous animals out there, and I could get lost easily, so I must always stay inside. She was also worried about her mother and husband having to travel through them. Again, this wasn't worrisome behavior given her health condition. I had been working with her for about 6 or 7 months when I would start waking up to her walking down the halls in the middle of the night. Sundowning is fairly normal for people with Alzheimer's, so again I wasn't troubled by this. But she started going to a specific window and giggling, like she was interacting with someone outside the window. When asked what she was doing, she'd say, "My mother is out there." Kind of weird, but there's a different perception in her world now. One night in dead of winter, her daughter and I are awoken to the blaring of the house's alarm system. The daughter and I checked the doors and windows, none of which seemed to be disturbed or unlocked. The only thing missing is Marie. She is nowhere in the house. Panicked, I rush outside to find her while the daughter continues to search the house. No tracks anywhere, no disturbed snow, nothing. After 10-15 minutes of yelling, searching the woods, I start making my way back to house where her daughter was already in the process of calling 911. As I approach the house, I see Marie. Standing outside the window she normally stood at, giggling. There's not a single footstep in the snow around her, nor is she cold to the touch. She's just standing there laughing at nothing, didn't even know she was outside. Her late-night window visits became more frequent after this, but less happy. She'd get combative with the window and scream at whoever she believed to be there. Then it just stopped one day. One of the last conversations I had with Marie before she passed, she told me to not let them take me into those woods. I hope they didn't. Unfortunately, it's hard to explain. I was hiking down a trail with my dog in remote northern Wisconsin when I just got a weird feeling. At the exact same time, the heckles on my dog went straight up and he began acting really anxious. About the same time, I came into a clearing in the woods and got hit with what I can only describe as a sound wave. It was like someone was blasting a subwoofer right next to me, but there was nothing around. The nearest road was maybe a mile away. Something told me to get the f out of there, so I quickly turned around and hiked as quickly as possible the rest of the way back. I didn't hear that bass sound after I left the clearing, but I still felt like something was following me. The Alaskan wilderness has a way of swallowing you whole, embracing you in its icy grip and challenging your very existence. It's a place where only the strongest survive, where solitude becomes your closest companion. I'm Jack Turner, a rugged individualist who has carved out a life of seclusion in a rustic cabin nestled deep within this unforgiving landscape. My days are defined by the rhythm of self-sufficiency. Chopping wood becomes a meditation, each swing of the axe a reminder of my resilience. Hunting provides sustenance, a reminder that I am a part of this wild world. And the tranquility that only isolation can offer becomes my solace, my refuge from a world that seems to grow more chaotic with each passing day. As the days grow shorter and the winter months stretch on, the snow-covered landscape closes in around me. The howling wind becomes a haunting symphony, and the dance of snowflakes outside my window is both mesmerizing and isolating. I find comfort in the routine, in the simple acts that tether me to reality. But one evening, as the wind's howl grew louder and the snowflakes danced with newfound intensity, something shifted. I peered through the frosty window of my cabin and caught a glimpse of movement among the trees. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of my imagination, an illusion conjured by the isolation and the long hours spent in the quiet wilderness. Yet, as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Glimpses of the same dark, hulking shape appeared on the periphery of my vision, always just out of reach. It was a presence that seemed to defy explanation, a feeling that crawled beneath my skin and nestled in the pit of my stomach. I hesitated to share my experiences with the outside world. Who would believe me, a lone man living in the heart of the wilderness? But I couldn't ignore the unsettling truth any longer. I began journaling my encounters, documenting every detail, every chilling observation. My descriptions painted a vivid picture, a towering figure covered in matted fur, eyes that gleamed with an otherworldly intelligence, and a presence that sent shivers down my spine. As the creature's appearances grew more frequent, my skepticism wavered. My rational mind clashed with the inexplicable reality I was facing. The isolation that had once brought me solace now deepened my uncertainty. I questioned the very foundation of my reality, grappling with the idea that there was more to this world than met the eye. Desperation drove me to seek answers in the stories of native Alaskan legends. Tales of similar creatures that inhabited the wilds echoed in the back of my mind, offering a sliver of validation for the inexplicable horrors I had witnessed. A turning point came during a stormy night when the wind howled like a banshee and the snow swirled in a frenzy. With a heart pounding in my chest, I mustered the courage to confront the creature that had haunted my every waking moment. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, I ventured into the blizzard, determined to capture evidence of the elusive being that had invaded my world. And there, at the edge of the clearing, my flashlight's beam illuminated an imposing figure. Its features were obscured by the swirling snow, yet I felt its presence reverberate through my very being. In those fleeting moments as I snapped photos in the blinding storm, I knew that what I had witnessed defied all logic. In the aftermath, I shared my story with a trusted friend and a researcher who treated my experiences with raw honesty. Despite my initial hesitation, I knew I had to speak my truth. With conviction, I declared, "Bigfoot is real, and I wouldn't lie about it." My account ignited a blend of fascination and skepticism among those who heard my tale, blurring the line between reality and the unexplainable. As I look out at the snow-covered expanse that surrounds my cabin, I am reminded that some mysteries are destined to remain hidden in the heart of the wilderness. The world may doubt my story, but I carry with me the knowledge that I have stared into the abyss and witnessed something that transcends understanding. The Alaskan wilderness is a place of wonder and terror, a realm where the line between reality and myth blurs, and the truth is as elusive as the creatures that roam its depths. Growing up, I remember my father telling me stories about his days as a logger. He was a strong, hard-working man, and he loved his job. But there was one story he would tell that always left me with a sense of unease, a story about a strange encounter he had in the woods. It was late autumn, and the logging season was coming to a close. My father and his crew were working hard to finish up their last few jobs before the winter snows arrived. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, my father decided to head back to camp early to prepare dinner for the crew. As he drove along the winding forest road, he suddenly spotted a large, hairy man dart out of the woods and across the road just a few feet in front of his truck. My father slammed on the brakes, his heart racing in his chest as he tried to make sense of what he had just seen. The creature was massive, covered in thick, matted hair and running on two legs like a human, but with a speed and agility that seemed almost unnatural. As quickly as it had appeared, the creature vanished into the woods on the other side of the road. My father sat in his truck, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself, so he drove back to the logging site and told his fellow lumberjacks what had happened. To his surprise, many of them believed his story. They had heard whispers of strange creatures living in the woods, creatures that were not quite human, but not quite animal either. Together, they decided to form a search party and see if they could find any trace of the creature my father had encountered. Armed with flashlights and a sense of determination, they set off into the woods, following the path the creature had taken as it crossed the road. They searched for hours, their flashlights casting eerie shadows among the trees, but they found no sign of the creature. As the night wore on and the temperature dropped, they eventually decided to abandon their search and return to camp. My father couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching them from the shadows, but he knew there was little they could do to find it. The story of my father's encounter with the strange, hairy man spread throughout the logging community, and while some dismissed it as a tall tale or a trick of the light, others believed it to be true. My father never saw the creature again, but the memory of that night stayed with him for the rest of his life. As I grew older, I found myself wondering about the mysterious creature that had crossed my father's path all those years ago. Was it a figment of his imagination, or could it have been something more? I suppose I'll never know the truth, but the story remains a haunting reminder of the mysteries that still lurk within the depths of the forest. My brother is 2 years older, and we've probably spent 10,000 hours and then some in the woods together. Whether it was building forts, BMX tracks to LARPing and hunting. We've traveled across the U.S. exploring caves, canyons, cliff diving, mountain biking, camping, hunting whitetail, mule deer, wild boar, etc. since 2016 when we get the time off. I feel like adding this is important because there's genuinely nothing I wouldn't do or fear when I have him by my side, but this time was different, and we both felt it. We've had our fair share of adventures and stories to tell of all sorts, but this one has felt like a lingering stain on my memory. We were both mid-20s-ish, and it was 2019, and this was probably my 5th time hunting the area and the first I brought my brother along. It's a large forest area of public land that has a few county roads, which are basically two tracks that stretch miles throughout the area. We make the trip up in my truck with our tents, 3 in total, one for each of us and another to change in and keep our gear in. Without making this long-winded, we set up camp a couple miles from the truck, which we drove for quite a few miles through the trails. Basically middle of nowhere. Nearest main road is probably 8-10 miles away. We arrived late in the night, set up camp, and quickly fell asleep after a long trip. We then spent the next day scouting, tracking, then made back to camp for the night. We cooked, then ate, had some beers, and bullshitted. The night was still early, but we had a long day and decided to head off for the night. Everything up until this point was normal. I was suddenly awoke to something smacking my tent and hearing my brother's voice call my name. I knew something was off. I called back to him, and he immediately unzipped my tent and made his way inside. I could tell he was disturbed when I went to ask him what's wrong, and he immediately grabbed my shoulder and told me to shush. The sun wasn't up yet, so I think it was around 4:35-ish a.m. We sat in my tent, and what we heard still confuses me to this day. I can only explain it as whale sounds. Different tones of extremely loud noise that I could feel throughout my body. It would come and go, but there would only be a few seconds of silence in between the sounds. It would vary from high-pitched squeals and everything in between to very low sounds that had literal ground-shaking reverb. I regrettably didn't think to grab my phone or record anything that was going on, because what I was hearing didn't seem real, and in the moment I was awestruck. The sound went on until daylight started to break. I believe it was about an hour, but I'm not really sure. Neither of us spoke, and at the time it felt like I could feel the energy around me, almost like my body was covered in white noise, if that makes any sense. It wasn't even minutes after the sound stopped, it started to rain, and one of the craziest thunderstorms while I was camping happened. The forecast didn't predict or account for any rain the days we were going to be there prior to making the trip. All the stakes for the tent, our gear, was in completely ripped out of the ground, and both of our tents had multiple stakes ripped out as well. Those things were drove into the ground with an axe, and would take some insane force to unearth even a single one. My brother dismisses it and won't even talk about it, saying it was just machinery being dragged. But at the time, we both shared the same feeling of fear and dread. Just seems odd it was still the middle of the night, and we were so far removed from any nearby community's industry to hear and experience this occurrence. I, 27 female, live in a small town in North Italy, a valley between our typical old mountains, round shapes, covered in forest, not high, so just behind my home lots of hikes start. I always lived here and I like mountains, plus I'm getting in shape, so the terrain is ideal, especially because I'm really familiar with it. So, last summer I was walking my usual route when I thought I could try to have a short hike before sunset, and took a route. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Italian ground, but there aren't the big spaces and long distances typically of US, I imagine. Picture the average small town of 2,500 people. Starting from bottom and a 2-hour hike, you're on top of the mountain, and the route I took was about 30 minutes to arrive halfway the mountain to a big Christian cross and a nice view. I was with my dog, a well-trained Spitz, a nice company with good instincts that I trust. He's a working dog more than a pet, despite his size. So we took the path and start making our way up, nice and relaxed, but active, as we didn't have too much light time left. I just figured that if light went low, I'd just turn around and head home. No chances of getting lost. Woods immediately engulf us, pretty dense, but it's the norm. Not even 15 minutes of walking, and I'm paralyzed with this overwhelming sense of dread. The woods are completely silent. My skin crawls up just thinking about it. Even my dog stops, anxious. I just couldn't understand what was scaring me so much, and the sudden silence. I couldn't move a muscle. I've read The Gift of Fear, and the only time I didn't listen to my guts, I lost my spleen in an accident. So wide-eyed and hyper-alert, I forced myself to move and noped out of there. It was like my brain was screaming, "If you stay here, you'll die." Walking back, I couldn't stop the urge to continuously look behind me. At some point, I was practically running, and I kept thinking that if I sprained an ankle there, I would die. The dog seemed relieved when we had turned back, and he kept looking behind too. When we finally made it out of the woods and back on the road, I felt a wave of relief and ran all the way back home for the adrenaline I had. To this day, I don't know what happened, and I haven't gone back. Thanks for listening, Horror Cowboys. See you tomorrow at the same time. This happened at Yosemite National Park. I found myself face to face with the inexplicable. As a park ranger named John, my job often led me deep into the woods, but nothing could have prepared me for the mysteries hidden within those ancient trees. It all began when I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin tucked away in a forgotten corner of the forest. The cabin was weathered by time, its wood worn and splintered, and yet there was an undeniable allure to its desolation. With a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, I pushed open the creaking door and stepped into a forgotten past. The interior was musty and filled with a sense of abandonment. Broken furniture and tattered remnants of what had once been a home littered the floor. But it was the discovery of a journal, tucked beneath a decaying mattress, that sent shivers down my spine. The pages were yellowed and brittle, and as I read the words scrawled upon them, I was drawn into a tale of horror that had unfolded decades before. The journal belonged to a former park ranger who had vanished without a trace. His entries chronicled his patrols deep within the park's woods, where he had encountered an unknown predator, an entity that defied the natural order and filled him with unspeakable dread. The description he provided was hauntingly vivid, etching an image in my mind that I would never forget. The creature he had encountered had overlong arms that hung nearly to its feet, tipped with claws that stretched an astonishing 8 inches from its long-haired fingers. Its entire body was covered in a glistening silver fur that seemed to catch the light in an otherworldly way, and its feet, massive and hairy like those of a giant, ended in size 35 human-like feet. The most disconcerting feature, however, was its head. Resembling that of a grizzly bear, but with a shorter, deeply scarred snout, the creature bore the marks of battles with beings even larger and more fearsome than itself. Yet, despite this fearsome exterior, its piercing blue eyes exuded a sense of ancient wisdom and experience. The journal entry recounted a terrifying battle between the former ranger and this enigmatic creature. The details of the confrontation were lost, the pages bearing the remnants of some struggle that had torn them from their binding. As I held those brittle sheets in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was entangled in a web of darkness that had been spun long before my time. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows lengthened within the cabin, I couldn't help but wonder if the creature described in those pages was still out there, lurking in the depths of the forest. Did it truly kill the former ranger, or had he somehow managed to survive and escape the horrors that had pursued him? The nights that followed were restless, plagued by dreams of those piercing blue eyes and the terror that they held. I patrolled the woods with a newfound unease, my senses heightened, searching for any sign of the silver-furred creature that had haunted my thoughts. The mysteries of the abandoned cabin and the journal entries continued to unravel in unexpected ways as I delved deeper into the history of the park and the legends that had whispered through the trees for generations. With each step, I felt as though I was peeling back the layers of a reality that had remained hidden from the world, a reality that threatened to consume me whole. And so, amidst the towering trees and the haunting calls of unseen creatures, I found myself entangled in a chilling tale of the unknown, a tale that blurred the lines between legend and reality, and that left me wondering whether some nightmares are rooted in truths far more terrifying than we dare to imagine. The first encounter happened back when I was in 8th or 9th grade, can't remember exactly. I was friends with a bunch of guys and girls who were a year ahead of me. all of which I had met through my best friend Tom. Well, our little circle of friends went out for a night of bowling. The group consisted of myself, Tom, Jeremy, Beth, and Beth's friend Ashley. Beth had just broken up with her boyfriend Corey. Corey was a real piece of work, extremely arrogant, pushy, possessive, and controlling. This was only my second time meeting Beth and Ashley, and I was unaware of the breakup, or even of Corey's existence. We had our fun bowling and wandered out to the picnic tables surrounding the bowling alley and adjacent go-kart track, by which time it's getting rather late. All of the sudden, Beth and Ashley start getting texts and phone calls from their friends, and Beth becomes visibly shaken. The two of them promptly, and with little explanation, run off to another section of the property. Tom, Jeremy, and I are confused as hell. We get clued in by text that Corey has gone full-on, hardcore stalker mode and basically interrogated a bunch of his and Beth's mutual friends in order to figure out where she was. And he was on his way here now. No sooner than we had figured that out when we see him and his posse or entourage stroll into the picnic area. They spot the three of us chilling at our table, and Corey apparently tells his guys to stay where they are before walking very pointedly towards us. Completely unannounced, he leans over onto our table, putting his face level with and uncomfortably close to ours. "So, where's Beth?" Now, I had never met the guy, but he was already giving me really bad vibes. Both Jeremy and Tom already despised him from previous encounters with the guy. As such, we had all made the unspoken agreement to cover for Beth. "We don't know," Jeremy and Tom replied, just shrugging and trying to brush the question off with their best poker faces. Corey just stares us each down in turn, unblinking, clearly trying to intimidate us. We stare right back. "Oh yeah," he asks. "Well, I know she's here." And that's when he said the words I'll never forget, the same statement that made every stalker alert and warning bell go off in my head simultaneously. "She hasn't been answering my calls. But it's okay, because now I've got a new truck, so that means when she doesn't answer my calls, I can come find her." His voice was intense. He was completely, 100% serious and stared me dead in the eye as he said it. As soon as he made that little proclamation, the atmosphere at the table went from tense to about one step short of a full-scale brawl. My legs were under the table, so I slowly edged them out to the side and clenched my fists, ready to go to blows with this creeper if I had to. There was a little more small talk with threatening undertones from both sides that I don't remember much of, before Corey finally relented. He went back to regroup with his posse. He stuck around though, and it started to seem like he might be working up the courage to start something. However, we made it clear that we wouldn't be backing down, and Jeremy started spreading the word, very obviously, that I was armed. I wasn't, based on a joking comment I'd made earlier in the night. It seemed to do the trick. Luckily, Beth emerged from hiding and finally talked Corey down. He promptly went from threatening to sort of creepy friendly, tried to show off his new truck to us and make small talk. Beth and Ashley peeled out of there pretty quick, like understandably afterward. The night proceeded without incident. Fast forward about 4 years. Corey and Beth had more drama as time went by, with him sending threatening and harassing texts, spreading lies to damage her reputation, etc. At one point, they actually got back together, Tom and I made our disapproval abundantly clear to Beth. But that didn't last long before the two broke up again. One day, Tom and I are at Jeremy's house, where he and his girlfriend Tara are in contact with Beth, who's working her shift at a large, local sporting goods store. Tara, after some texts and a phone call, puts her phone down and has this really concerned look. We ask her what's up, and she tells us all that Corey is at Beth's workplace. At first, he just kind of wandered around the aisles, staring at her. But then he actually took one of the hunting knives on stock out of its case and began brandishing, toying with it as he stared at her, roaming around the store as he did so. Tom heard this and immediately began to march downstairs to his truck, with me following right behind him. He was absolutely pissed. Keep in mind that Tom's a pretty big guy, very athletic with a potentially nasty temper. He had done some MMA training in the past. To top it all off, he's an active duty infantryman and Army Ranger. He was on leave from training when this was Cluster F was going down. Now consider the fact that he had an AR-15 with ammunition in his truck. Not a good situation for anyone involved, least of all the stalker. Of course, I was really pumped up too, but at the same time I didn't want to see my friend go off half-cocked and end up in jail or worse. Jeremy and Tara talked us both down, and I was about to call the police when Beth contacted us, saying she was all clear. She had talked to her manager about the situation, and Corey had ended up finally leaving. While the manager walked Beth to her car in the parking lot, the stalker's truck was out there, waiting for her. I talked with Beth extensively after the incident, advising her that I had connections with the police department and all of the local judges, which is true. She already had plenty of grounds on which to file for a protective order, if not stalking harassment charges. Alas, she decided to let the matter drop, and luckily the guy hasn't shown his face again. Still, I wouldn't be surprised if he tries something else in the future. The forest had always been my sanctuary, a realm of towering trees, whispering leaves, and the soft symphony of nature's orchestra. As a seasoned park ranger, I'd spent years patrolling the remote national park, ensuring the tranquility of its wilderness remained undisturbed. Little did I know, my familiar haven concealed secrets darker than the shadows that danced between the ancient trunks. It started innocently enough. Strange occurrences disrupted the usual calm of the woods. The rustling leaves transformed into ominous whispers, the singing birds into harbingers of doom. Animals, once predictable in their behavior, took on an otherworldly intelligence, their eyes reflecting a knowing gaze that sent shivers down my spine. Determined to protect the park's reputation and its visitors, I embarked on a journey to unravel the mysteries hidden within the heart of the forest. As I delved deeper into the investigation, I stumbled upon symbols etched into the bark of ancient trees, long-forgotten rituals that spoke of a dark history predating the establishment of the national park. Local legends murmured about a curse, a vengeful spirit awakened by the intrusion of modern civilization. The trees themselves seemed to groan with the weight of their ancient tales, warning of retribution for those who dared to disturb the equilibrium of the sacred grounds. The line between reality and nightmare blurred as I confronted apparitions manifesting the guilt of those who exploited the forest for profit. Shadows took on ghastly forms, morphing into grotesque figures that vanished with every blink. The air thickened with an ominous energy, pressing against me like an invisible force. With each step, I journeyed deeper into the heart of the forest, where the malevolent force awaited, hungering for retribution. The oppressive atmosphere amplified my terror, and the trees themselves seemed to close in, weaving a dense tapestry of ancient secrets that sought to ensnare me. As the climax approached, I found myself standing at the ancient ceremonial site, a place where the forest consciousness had been violated by humanity's disregard for the sacred. The vengeful spirit materialized before me, a manifestation of the collective rage of the trees, seeking justice for centuries of atrocities. The revelation was spine-chilling. The forest's consciousness had become a sentient force, a guardian of its own sanctity. The choice loomed before me: succumb to the curse and become a part of the haunting, or find a way to appease the angered spirits. In that moment, the weight of humanity's sins pressed upon me, and I realized the true horror of our disregard for the natural world. The forest was not just a collection of trees. It was a living, breathing entity with memories of the past and a voice that demanded retribution. As I made my choice, the forest's energy surged around me, a blend of fury and sorrow. The warning was clear: those who trespass on the sanctity of the natural world would inevitably face the unforgiving nature of ancient forces. My journey through the haunted depths of the national park became a cautionary tale, echoing through the trees, a reminder of the consequences of humanity's greed and disrespect for the sacred. In the 80s, I was with two friends hiking in the Okefenokee Forest in Florida. Basically a huge swamp with alligators, banana spiders, raccoons, and miles of black mud and creeks and trees. The biggest spider webs I've ever seen everywhere with these huge yellow spiders nearly walked into one. We were all tripping on acid when we found a long black wooden platform built in the middle of nowhere. It had weird symbols painted in white all over it. We stood on it looking around when about 50 raccoons silently walked out of the woods towards us, their little hands digging in the mud for food. They were not afraid of us. It was like that scene in Young Guns when they take mescaline and the Indians let them pass because they were in the spirit world. The raccoons surrounded up and passed by and under the platform. When they were gone, we were like, "Did you see that?" I walked to the end of the platform and looked down. The symbols came together in perspective like an optical illusion to form the head of Baphomet. We decided to leave and go to the beach instead of waiting around to get sacrificed to the goat god. "4 years ago, we bought an old house, and from the get-go it freaked me out. It's a one-time owner, but over 70 years old. A little old lady ran a daycare out of it until she got too old. We bought and fixed it up as our first house. 1. While remodeling, the radio would change station by itself. I would have it on some rock and thought the first couple times it was my dad just changing the station. Then one day, while working in the kitchen where the radio was, it changed twice, both from my station of rock to some straight-up gangster stuff. 2. One night I was doing some work late and called my dad for a question about some electrical stuff. While my cell phone was trying to ring, it turned white noise, and I heard the words in an old lady's voice. "Get out!" I hung up and told my house off. I really laid into it. Once I calmed down and realized I was alone, I left. 3. Cabinets in my house will be open when I walk through to this day. 4. A series of pictures we took before the remodel had snow in only one room. Every picture in that room, not the rest of the house. 5. Woke up one night to go pee, walked out in the hall to the bathroom, and threw my hands up in the air and yelled, "Whoa." As a teacher, this is a natural reaction right before I bump a child in the hall at school, but there was nobody in the hall. Just a shadow I saw for a second that seemed to be a young kid in the hall at my house. 6. Woke up one night with my eyes closed and had that feeling like I was being watched. I peeked and saw a little lady figure standing in the room. Closed my eyes real quick, then found the courage to look again and saw that it had moved to my wife's side of the bed. Got up and turned the light on, and it had vanished. 7. Went to the bathroom, closed the door. Was doing some calculus and the door opened. I leaned to close it, and it opened again. I then left it open. If a ghost wants to see and smell that, I will let it. 8. A light in the closet in what used to be the little old lady's room will be randomly on. 9. Just now, as I was looking at another thread, the baby's rocker arm moved to the floor slowly. The rocker has an arm that folds over and locks into place. The arm was at a 90-degree after we got him out of it about 4 hours ago. Now it's all the way down. Like I said, I don't believe in all this stuff. It's all just weird, never threatening or mean. What do you guys think? One late night I was all alone at the house. I was in my room on the green screen, laptop on bed, and I was in a chair where I can see the door into the hallway. All of a sudden I see a blur go by the door. I figure it was late and my eyes playing tricks on me, and then I heard what sounded like someone running down the hall, and then a door slam. Now every door in the house stays open unless you're using the restroom or sleeping, so I know all the doors are open. I grab my pistol and take a look-see in the hall. Nobody in hall, and my parents' door was shut, but they were out of town. The alarm is set, so I know no doors or windows were open. I call my buddy over and we clear that bedroom. Couldn't find nobody or any sign of anyone being in there. Not sure what that was, but know what I heard, and I know that the door was originally open. Back when I was a kid, my mother always spoke about her mom being a ranger. She would tell my mom how much she loved it. It inspired me to want to follow in her footsteps. With my grandparents dying and all, I watched my mother do her job, and she loved that park with everything she had. She did it well. She claims the only downfall was all the odd stuff she had heard in the trees, and that was apparently normal. As I grew up, I took over every day that I am on the job watching. I make sure that I always have my special soda with me. It always brings me comfort knowing I have my favorite drink. My friends always told me not to apply for the job, since so many resign and so many are told to keep quiet about things they see. My friends told me that people who get an opportunity to become a ranger, you begin to see some strange things. Back in 2019, I got a call to do the night shift for a park. My husband told me not to go. We had already made plans to go off for Christmas. I said we can't go out to eat if I'm not working to put food on the table. Besides, they need extra rangers to patrol, and I need to be there to help. We can celebrate when I get back. I went out the door, heading to the park. I was thinking on the way to the job that if I get bit by something, nobody is there to save me. At least I have my watch that the job gave me to communicate with others. The job is a blessing. Even if you were in trouble, you can always call somebody and they will help. Usually as I arrive to work, I see my best friend at work and did not know she was on the same shift. She had been doing a double. When I approached her, we spoke and she told me about the strange noises she heard right near a pond. All I wanted to do was go home and be with my husband. I really couldn't do anything but continue the job. She clocks back in for break and I'm just beginning my shift. It dawned on me that I forgot where my watch was. My friend told me to stay posted, and I agreed. We walked to my vehicle to get my soda. Anyway, I look over and I can't find my drink. I kept telling her the stage gets better and better. The event has started and we're now patrolling the park, making sure everything is running smoothly. She gets a call telling her she needs to split and go to the other side. Someone is requesting her. She told her boss Copy that she would report back to him. Turns out the boss never told her to split. It was something interfering. I went to the other side of the park to check on her, and I watched this creature jump down from the tree onto her back, driving both of them into the pond. I ran, trying to rip her off, but this thing was so strong it was not worth it. This creature went into the water so fast I didn't see it. It was a blessing that I've managed to survive. But my friend, well, that's a different story. I immediately reached out to the dispatcher in the park. Nobody answered. I called again from the watch and got the boss. I told them I was worried, and when it happened, he said they were going to send help. Right away they went in after her to try and locate her body. But there's no such luck finding anything. We had to shut down the park. We could not risk any of the public getting injured. We also informed the authorities and had them evacuate out of the park. Police said that it was something out of the ordinary that dragged her into the pond, as if that wasn't any more obvious. When we began to review the footage, we saw her, the noise that she had mentioned. My boss had simply come to the conclusion that she was going crazy, and we know she'd been going through things. But this is definitely not crazy. We had to call our family and let them know what had happened. So my job asked me called me while we were being so close. They did not take it well. So before I went home, I stopped by and let them know what happened. They were in disbelief. They could not believe it. I went home after, and before I could share with my husband what had happened, he saw the scratches on my arm and face from that thing. I broke down and told him that she's dead and everything had to be closed down. Facing her family was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. This is the only Christmas where I've had to work, and I hate it. I hate what I had to see. I had always been fascinated by the eerie stories my Aunt Mabel would tell us about her life in the rural area of western North Carolina, near the Smoky Mountains. As a child, I would listen intently as she spun tales of strange happenings and mysterious creatures that roamed the land. However, I never thought I would experience one of these stories myself. In October of 2022, Aunt Mabel invited me to visit her and her husband, Uncle Pete, for a weekend getaway. Their home was nestled at the foot of the mountains, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. I was excited to experience the tranquility and beauty of nature, as well as spend some time with my favorite relatives. On the first night of my visit, Aunt Mabel cooked a delicious feast, and we spent the evening reminiscing about old times and laughing at our shared memories. As we were cleaning up after dinner, Uncle Pete mentioned that he had been hearing some strange noises at night lately. He described them as heavy footsteps on their roof, as if some large creature was stomping around up there. Uncle Pete, a practical man who was rarely frightened by anything, assumed it was probably just a large raccoon or some other critter that had found its way onto their roof. However, Aunt Mabel's eyes grew wide, and she shared that the local Cherokee Indians had legends about a creature called the Dogman, a terrifying beast that was known to stalk the woods around the Smoky Mountains. As the night wore on, we discussed the possibility of the Dogman being responsible for the strange noises on the roof. I was both excited and apprehensive about the idea, as I had always been intrigued by cryptids and supernatural phenomena, but I wasn't sure how I would react if I actually encountered one. That night, as I lay in bed, I strained to listen for any strange sounds coming from the roof. At first, there was nothing but the gentle rustling of leaves outside my window. But just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard a heavy thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of large footsteps. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to hear more. For several minutes, the footsteps continued, moving from one end of the roof to the other. Then, just as suddenly as they had begun, they stopped. I didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night, my mind racing with thoughts of the Dogman and what it might be doing on my aunt and uncle's roof. The next morning, I told Aunt Mabel and Uncle Pete about the noises I had heard. They exchanged worried glances, and Aunt Mabel decided that it was time to consult with a local Cherokee elder who was well versed in the legends and lore of the Dogman. We spent the day with the elder, learning more about the mysterious creature and its connection to the land. He explained that the Dogman was an ancient spirit that guarded the forests, and that it was likely attracted to my aunt and uncle's home because of its remote location. I didn't believe it, but my aunt was into the whole story. That night, I was outside, trying to see what's on roof. I spent whole night, but I never heard or seen anything. Unfortunately, I had to leave next day. I asked my aunt and uncle to call me if they notice a sound on the roof again. Interestingly enough, we never spoke of it again. At 54 years old, I am a husband, father, and grandfather with a few years of Navy experience under my belt. My story takes place in central Pennsylvania, home to the Bald Eagle Ridge, a 60-mile-long mountain ridge that marks the boundary of the Appalachian Plateau to the west. This region of Pennsylvania is stunning, with the majority of the state's population residing in the valleys rather than the secluded mountaintops. About a decade ago, my wife, 25-year-old son, 2 grandchildren, and one of their friends joined me for a walk at the reservoir that supplies drinking water to our area in central Pennsylvania. The reservoir, created by damming a creek that runs through the valley, is a picturesque spot teeming with fish and surrounded by wildlife. Before suffering 2 strokes in recent years, I was an avid hunter and fisherman who taught my family to appreciate nature. Naturally, my son and I were armed during our walk to protect ourselves from any potentially dangerous animals. Despite starting our walk later than planned, we enjoyed our journey up the mountain. As night fell, we each carried a flashlight and proceeded without concern. While walking, I suddenly felt uneasy for no apparent reason. I then heard what sounded like heavy footsteps above us on the steep hillside to our left. As my son led our group, we all stopped to listen. I couldn't help but feel startled, though I initially dismissed the sound as a deer or another animal. However, the entire group remained alert as we continued walking. Soon, we heard the sound of a large branch snapping, followed by what seemed like a tree or boulder being thrown. It was a loud noise, different from the sound of a tree falling due to wind. We then heard what sounded like a heavy person running. At this point, we picked up our pace, trying to reach our truck quickly. Although our flashlights illuminated the hillside, we saw nothing but trees. The remainder of the walk back to the truck was uneventful, but we remained on high alert, unsure of what had made the noise. Based on my experience, I believe it sounded like something had ripped a tree from the ground and thrown it. Could it have been a Bigfoot shadowing us? It's a possibility I cannot dismiss. I had always been intrigued by the unknown, especially when it came to sightings of unidentified flying objects. So when I moved to Chicago in May 2019 to begin my new job as a park ranger, I never expected that I would have my own encounter with the unexplained. On a warm spring afternoon, I was sitting on the front porch of my new home, enjoying the sunshine and sipping on a cold glass of lemonade. My neighbor, Ken Ross, a friendly middle-aged man with a penchant for stargazing, was relaxing on his porch as well. We exchanged pleasantries, discussing the weather and our plans for the weekend. Suddenly, Ken's gaze drifted upward, his eyes widening in shock. He nudged me, pointing to the sky. "Look at that," he exclaimed. Following his gaze, I saw a strange, black amorphous object hovering in the sky. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, and it seemed to defy all logic. We watched the object in awe as it moved gracefully across the sky. It was difficult to gauge its size and distance, but it was clear that this was no ordinary aircraft or weather balloon. Ken, being an avid UFO enthusiast, quickly pulled out his cell phone and began recording the enigmatic object. "What do you think it is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I have no idea," Ken replied, his eyes never leaving the screen of his phone. "But it's definitely not something I've ever seen before." As we continued to watch the UFO, a sudden gust of wind caused it to wobble, momentarily revealing a metallic glint beneath its black exterior. It then continued on its path, eventually disappearing behind a cluster of trees. Ken and I exchanged bewildered glances, unsure of what we had just witnessed. We spent the next few hours reviewing the footage, analyzing the object's shape, movement, and size. Despite our best efforts, we were unable to come up with a plausible explanation for the bizarre sighting. In the days that followed, Ken uploaded the video to various UFO forums, hoping that someone might be able to shed some light on the mysterious object. The response was overwhelming, with many viewers expressing their own theories and experiences with similar sightings. As a park ranger, my job often put me in close contact with nature, and I couldn't help but wonder if there were other unknown phenomena lurking in the skies above. My encounter with the black amorphous UFO had sparked a newfound fascination with the unexplained, and I found myself spending more time with Ken, discussing our shared interests and embarking on nightly sky watches. The sighting had left an indelible mark on both of our lives, serving as a constant reminder that there are still mysteries in this world waiting to be discovered. And as I continued my work as a park ranger, I couldn't help but look up at the sky and wonder what other secrets lay hidden among the stars. As soon as I turned 18, my parents demanded that I got a job. When 3 months passed, I was still unemployed. They went out and did it for me. I got hired at my family's ranger business, supplied places with rangers, and we'd go out and protect the park for however long the rangers' owners could pay. I started in early winter. I was cold all the time. The job I was working at did not start until about 9 at night, or at least my shift didn't. I had to work until 9 in the morning, 12 hours, 5 days a week. The pay was all right. It was my first day at a new park. It was a ski resort, and they had hired rangers to act as security. We weren't really as qualified, but my family didn't have the greatest moral compass, so to speak. I started my shift. I talked with a little guy at the front. He said it was slow, not much happening. I was glad to hear this, sitting inside and doing nothing for 12 hours. That's what I'd normally be doing anyway. I went inside and met the guy I'd be working with. We'll call him Freddie. He was reading the paper and drinking coffee. "First day?" he had asked. "Well, I never worked at this place before, but I've been working with Tony for quite a while. It's a good business, I trust him," he responded with a little chuckle and went back to sipping his coffee. Nothing happened for a couple of hours. We sat back and relaxed. It talked about our lives and even got into a funny conversation about my uncle. About 3 hours in, we heard a loud banging at the door. Freddie got up to open it. There was nothing there, aside from a trail in the snow leading to the door. There wasn't much we could think about it. Maybe a bird or an animal. I don't know, Freddie said, getting back to his seat. I thought it was a bit weird for a bird to slam into the door fast enough to make a bang that loud and still somehow get back up and walk out of sight. I didn't say anything. I just shrugged, whatever. After even more sitting and talking, Freddie got up and said that he was going to use the bathroom. He jokingly asked if I could hold on the fort, then went outside to use the restroom. I leaned back in my chair, quietly singing a Billy Joel song that had been stuck in my head, when Freddie basically kicked the door in, holding his hand. It was cut up and bleeding badly. I did not think to ask questions, so I shot up, ran to the first aid cabinet, grabbing the wrap, and put it around his arm. "What happened out there?" I'd asked him. He looked at my eyes and opened his mouth. There was another super loud bang on the door. I rushed to the door and locked it. I didn't know what was out there, but I did not feel like waiting for it to realize the door was open. Freddie was screaming in pain. I wrapped his wounds, but it wouldn't keep up forever. I went over to the phone. I picked it up. It called an ambulance. I explained that something attacked my coworker. They asked what. I told them I don't know, and they gave me a half-assed, "We'll send somebody," and I hung up. They asked to stand in line with them, but I didn't see how that would stop Freddie from bleeding out. Freddie slumped down, leaning against the table in the room. I slapped his face slightly to keep him awake. "Freddie, who did this?" He cleaned his eyes and couldn't be bothered to keep his head anymore. He was out. His cut was worse than I thought, and the ambulance needed to come very quickly. As I put a blanket on him, another loud bang at the window made me jump. I looked back, and there was a bloody hand on the window. It was a man, and he was begging to be let in. I ran over to the door and unlocked it. I went to the side where he was at, and I didn't see him. Did he run around? I looked down and my jaw dropped. Right where he was standing was a trail of blood in the stand going around the wall. I broke out of my shock, turning the corner, and there were the culprits and just one wolf. But I know he wasn't the only one there. We both stood there, looking at each other. He snarled and I gulped. I knew the time it took me to get the door was a lot less than it took him to get to me. I didn't want to risk it, just in case. I kept standing there. He took a step back. Maybe he's leaving, I thought to calm myself down. But he did not leave. He took a step back and, knowing what was coming, I ran to the door. He stopped. He lunged, biting into the flesh of my leg. I screamed out in pain, but at least he wasn't calling his pack, or so I thought. He started to tear flesh, and I foolishly attempted to shake him off. He was on there tight, ripping. I tried to push him off, but his teeth only sunk in deeper. Now I'd put my right hand between my leg and the roof of his mouth, prying his teeth. I limped inside, slammed the door shut. I could see him, these loud bone noises popping, and seeing him now stand up on two legs, looking at me through the door. How I was lucky I had survived. I wasn't sure what to do. I was bleeding out pretty bad, and the only gun I had was in my Jeep that was left outside. That's when I saw more of these things. They were upright walking wolves, and they were pacing around this place, moving back and forth, looking in the windows, waiting for one of us to come out. I sat there next to Freddie, holding him, holding myself, trying to keep myself conscious. I was bleeding pretty bad, and these things were out there. I counted at least 3 of them, 3 of the largest wolves I'd ever seen in my life. What was going on? As I remember things starting to fade, I couldn't tell you what happened next. But the door burst open, and several EMTs rushed in, attending myself and Freddie. They loaded me up on a stretcher, threw me in the ambulance, and the next thing I know, I'm being patched up. After this, I never heard from Freddie again, and I was quickly removed from that location and reassigned to a different one altogether. I was told nothing. I was not allowed to ask questions, and even now, I live with the nightmare. A nightmare of strange wolves, very violent, and had I not made it back inside, I would have been torn to pieces. The sun was just beginning to set as I arrived at the ridge overlooking the lower Molilla River. I was a cryptid investigator, and I had spent countless weekends exploring the wilderness, searching for evidence of unknown creatures. This particular weekend, I was intrigued by the recent reports of strange rapping noises coming from this area. As I set up my camp, I noticed an unsettling lack of game, especially considering it was hunting season. With my gear ready and a sense of anticipation building, I settled in for the night, listening carefully for any unusual sounds. As darkness enveloped the landscape, I suddenly heard a distinct rapping on a tree not too far from my campsite. Excited, I grabbed a branch and began to rap out my own patterns in response. Over the course of 15 minutes, I heard raps coming from 3 other locations, each with their unique patterns, a series of 2 raps followed by a pause, and then 3 raps transitioning from a slow to a fast beat. One of the sounds was oddly dull, as if it were made by pounding on a rotten log. Then, just as suddenly as they began, the rapping sound ceased. I continued to rap out my own patterns throughout the rest of the weekend and into Monday, but there was no further response. On my last day in the area, I decided to explore the surrounding woods and came across a park ranger named Lori. I told her about my experience with the rapping sounds and asked if she had any insights or theories. "Well," Lori began, "I've heard those rapping noises too, and I've always wondered if it might be another hunter or a child playing around. But I've also considered the possibility that we might be communicating with an unknown species. It sounds like something straight out of Star Trek, doesn't it?" We both laughed at the comparison, but the idea of communicating with a mysterious creature was both thrilling and unnerving. As I packed up my gear and prepared to leave the ridge, I couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder and curiosity. The rapping sounds remained unexplained, and the thought of an unknown predator lurking in the woods continued to haunt my imagination. As I drove away from the lower Molilla River, I promised myself that I would return someday, hoping to unravel the mystery behind the rapping sounds and uncover the truth about the enigmatic creatures that may dwell within the depths of the forest. My grandfather told me the story about the eerie incident that made him quit being a ranger. My grandfather used to work to be a park ranger in Uganda and had many stories to tell us about misbehaving teenagers who thought it was funny to stay illegally in the park overnight, white supremacist tourists who think they could hunt any time, and even indigenous people who believed the land belonged to them. But this time, he told me the story why he resigned from being a ranger, as he thought it was old enough to hear this creepy story. And after hearing it, I'm thankful for him quitting, or else I probably wouldn't be here today. One day, he and his coworker, we'll call him Sam, went out to patrol at night. As they were walking, they saw a very high, unusual amount of snake activity everywhere. Ignoring it, they continued on their job, and they had heard multiple trumpets of elephants and saw many zebras running in no particular direction, just away from the place that he and his co-worker were going deeper into the depths of the forest. They assumed that it was somebody, possibly teenagers, causing trouble. This made them cautious and alert for danger. They continued going deeper in with their rifles loaded and lamps in front of them. Then they saw a blue shimmery light glowing in the shape of a circle in the forest. It looked to be like a portal. My grandfather had advised his co-worker to examine it. As Sam leaned in to touch it, he was immediately sucked in like a vacuum. Now, I'm not relating Derek to trash, but who touches a portal? After waiting a few moments for Derek to come out, but as expected, he didn't. My grandfather ran away from the portal and towards the cabin of rangers. There, he shared this unnatural incident with the rest of the rangers who slept there. They collectively decided to go check it out the next morning. The next morning, they went to the same place when my grandfather saw the portal. There was no portal and no sign of Derek either. His co-workers then did not believe him and said that Derek must have slipped drugs and hallucinated the whole thing. My grandfather resigned after that. He did not want to see more supernatural incidents happening and also did not want to die. And there was a huge cover-up that happened with Derek and him disappearing. Is he still alive in some alternate universe? Did he turn into something like a ghost? Is he dead? Nobody knows. It's 1982 and I just ended my time in the Army. After getting home, I found nothing had changed. That and my experiences in the service left me in a poor mental state. I loved the outdoors of camping from an early age, so I foolishly decided that camping in the Florida Everglades would give me the peace of mind I desperately needed. After 3 days, I had enough. I packed up my gear and headed out only to realize that I had somehow gotten myself lost. There were about 7 hours of daylight left, so I climbed the tallest tree I saw to get my bearings. The tree was pretty thin, and just as I saw the way I needed to go, I slipped down and fell above 16 feet. My knee and ankle were sprained very badly, and the pain was nearly unbearable. I limped as far as possible in the direction I needed to go, but soon I couldn't stand the pain anymore. Finding the path leading out, I sat and started scooting backward as best I could. It was hard going as the path was made of crushed shells and gravel. An hour later, and I saw a large cat come out of the bush. It slowly started towards me much like a house cat does when he sees a bird. Feeling very vulnerable and unarmed, I knew I was in deep SHT. Each time I scooted backward, it would lunge and sort of flop its front paws. Craziest thing I ever saw. It was about 10 yards from me when from my right came a rock about the size of a softball, flying horizontally like a missile. It struck the side of the cat's head so hard that aside from literally exploding, it folded around backward and slapped its body. I heard the crunch and saw the blood mist on impact. I swear every single word is absolute truth. I looked to the right and saw him standing there just inside the tree line. Massive dark hair covered except his face. It was dark but easily human, like we made eye contact, and I felt very calm. To this day, I can't be sure if I heard or just felt safe, but I heard that word inside my head. I looked back at the cat. I thought it made a gurgling sound. I still don't know, but when I turned my back, my savior was gone. I was replaying everything in my mind when I heard a crack at 5 o'clock. As I turned toward the sound, a long, thin stick came flying out of the trees, landing a few feet behind me. I never saw or heard him after the first moment, but I was positive he threw me a crutch to help me get on my feet and make it out. Over the years, I held the experience to myself alone, knowing I'd be locked up if I told anyone. There are bad apples in every species, but people need to understand they have compassion for us unless attacked. Back in high school, my friend's family had a break-in. This family lived in a rural area, and their land was a little tough to find. Most people got lost trying to find it the first time, and usually they'd need to send someone to the road to flag down anyone that might be looking for them. law enforcement, pizza guy, guests, etc. Some guy had broken into one of the sheds and had possibly stolen something, so they had called the police in the middle of the night. This particular night, they didn't want to send anyone to the road because they thought the burglar was armed and possibly still in the area. The police seemed to have found their land easily and went about their business for the night, investigating the shed and sweeping the property. They found the guy hiding in the barn and arrested him, open and shut case. Homeless transient that nabbed some tools from the shed. Once they were wrapping up, one of them said it was okay to call the lady that flagged them down at the entrance to their land back to the house. The family hadn't sent anyone to the road. I have always been an avid hunter, spending most of my free time out in the woods. I have hunted everything from deer to turkeys and even tried my luck at trapping. However, nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced one spring morning 15 years ago. I was turkey hunting on my family's property along the Grand River in Ionia County, Michigan. The birds had flown down from the roost and gone in the opposite direction of where they usually went, making it challenging to track them down. Despite my efforts, I couldn't get them to come to any calls. Frustrated, I decided to take a quick nap and leaned against a big oak tree. It was a beautiful day, and the warmth of the sun felt good on my skin. I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of the strangest roaring sound I have ever heard. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before, and it sounded like it was right on top of me. I was instantly filled with fear, thinking that some creature was going to tear me to pieces. I held my 12 gauge tightly, ready to defend myself. The sound came again, and this time it was directly overhead. I looked up to see a hot air balloon above the treetops with a blonde woman firing the burner, and an elderly couple looking like they were having the time of their lives. Feeling relieved, I let out a deep breath and chuckled at my reaction. It was then that I heard something else, something in the distance, and it didn't sound like any animal I knew. I froze, unsure of what to do. I listened carefully, and the sound became louder and more distinct. It was then that I saw it, a Sasquatch. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes, thinking it was a bear, but as it came closer, I could see it was something else. It stood over 8 feet tall and was covered in dark hair. Its eyes met mine, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods. I sat there in shock, trying to make sense of what had just happened. For years, I had heard stories about Sasquatches, but I had never believed them until that moment. It was a surreal experience that left me questioning what else was out there that we didn't know about. From that day on, I always made sure to keep my eyes and ears open, knowing that anything was possible when it came to the mysteries of the forest. I first met my wife some 22 years ago. Shortly thereafter, I was warmly welcomed into the annual family deer camp. They must have seen the hook in my mouth that escaped me at the time because they were very guarded about access to the property, and no one outside of the family hunted it with rare exception. One of the first things her uncle proudly showed me was the family collection of stone points. I recall counting at least 75 distinct pieces, if not more. I am by no means an expert on the subject, but from the limited research I've done, the collection represented a broad range of time from the Neolithic to the woodland Indian period. I was of course curious why he would show me these points prior to my first opening day of deer season with my soon-to-be in-laws. The question was answered when he told me, "I'm showing you this so you understand there are things you won't understand at times when you're out there." I had no idea what this meant until one turkey season some 4 or 5 years later. Mind you, I had archery and gun hunted the property many times in those first few years with good success. I had never been truly scared when on stand before daylight or waiting for dark to climb down so I wouldn't scare the deer lingering in the fields. Sure, I was creeped out a few times due to my own imagination, but nothing like what I experienced that April dusk. I had been out for a couple hours before dark, trying to pattern the birds and see where they were roosting. My plan was to find that out and come out the next morning ready to bust a nice gobbler right after fly down. Of course, the birds ended up roosting on the far southwest corner of the property, about as far you could get from where my truck was parked on the north end, near the old Stagecoach Ford area, just south of the house. The sun had just set as I neared the Ford area. I was maybe 200 yards from the Ford when I saw what I thought was a light on a boat close to the opposite riverbank. As I got closer, I heard splashing and saw the light bob back and forth. No big deal until I heard the distinct sound of horse leather and metal bits and pieces clinking and squeaking, along with a low voice alternately calling what sounded like gee and haw. Before you ask how do I know what that means and sounds like, I grew up on a farm and my father had a team of ponies that he used in pull-in competitions. I also had two uncles that had Belgian draft horses they showed at county fairs and pulled wagons in what seemed like every small town's festival parade for 40 miles around. I can't tell you how many times growing up I saw pony pulling competitions or tossed candy out of a wagon in a parade. Back to the lights and sounds, I didn't really process it at first. I kept thinking those are weird sounds to be coming from someone night fishing. My truck was parked about 125 yards more or less due west from the Ford on the two-track that led up the hill and out to the road. As I got closer, the light and sound seemed as if they were crossing the river, heading toward the back area of the house, old Stagecoach stop. The closer I got, the dimmer the light got and the quieter the splashing, voices, and creaking and clinking became. I don't know when the light went out or the sounds died away, because at this point I had stopped walking and was running at a pace that would shame Forrest Gump. I made it to my truck in record time, started it up, and flew up the two-track and out to the road, quivering like a scared child. Thanks for listening, Horror Cowboys. See you tomorrow at the same time.